Sure. All right, we'll go ahead. Morning, everybody. Going to bring the regular meeting of the Tahoe Truckee Sanitation Agency for February 19th to order. We'll start with roll call.
We have Director Wilson,
Was
Brad,
that
can you-
Wilson?
He's here.
Director Wilson. We have Director Cox.
Yeah.
Director Cox. We have Director Clement. Director Wilkins.
Present.
Sorry. And Director Tresson.
Present. Okay, let's go ahead and do the Pledge of Allegiance. Everybody would stand, against the flag, and begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yes, sir. Okay, I'll just have you, they can see you. We'll put you right here front and center so you can see everyone and they can see you, and you'll be in front of the podium to hear everyone who has to speak, okay?
Technology is a wonderful thing. It's fine, Dale. We're going to keep rolling here at this point. Going to move to item 2. That's public comment. If anybody has anything to address the board on that's not already on the agenda. Did we get any written comment from UC? No?
No, sir.
At this point then, we will go ahead and close the public comment portion of the meeting and move to item 3. This is a review and adopt agenda. If any of the other board members then desire to move any items around on the agenda.
Move approval of the agenda.
I will make a motion in a second to maintain the agenda as is. Any comment? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Yes.
A roll call.
Yeah, yeah, you roll call. Go. All motions need roll call. Rochelle, will you handle that?
Sure. Director Wilson,
Yes.
Director Cox,
Yes.
Director Wilkins,
Yes.
and Director Clement.
Yes.
Sorry, and Director Tresson.
Yes. All right, we'll move to item 4, which is the consent agenda. Do any of the board members have anything they want to pull from the consent agenda? If not,
Move approval of the consent calendar.
I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, a second from Director Clemens. Any public comment on the consent agenda? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
Director Cox,
Yes.
Director Clement,
Yes.
Director Wilkins,
Yes.
Director Tresson.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Okay, moving right along. Item 5.1 is a resolution accommodating Director Dave Smeltzer, the recently resigned board member from Alpine Springs. A very nice resolution that was included in the board packet. I don't think I'm going to read it, but the intent is to express appreciation of the board for Dave's time. Those of you who met Dave, was a good board member, kind of silent, didn't speak a lot, but when he spoke, I think everybody really listened to his opinion. So appreciate all his time on the board. Staff has put together a nice little plaque here to give Dave as well, and so we wish Dave the best. I don't know if anybody else has anything else they want to add in regards to Dave.
Yeah, I'll just say, I enjoyed working with Dave. He was a very down-to-earth guy. Had a lot of great life experiences that I think, translated to his role here. And it was fun to get to know him a little bit, in the years he was here.
Awesome. And so Dave's not here, but I don't know whether Bert's going to bring that back, or you guys will set up a time to meet with him.
We'll reach out.
Okay.
Our understanding was Dave was going to be able to make it today. Something's come up, so we'll reach out to him and make a appointment with him to get the plaque and the resolution.
Okay. So yeah, that's great. Half the board, we definitely wish him well in all his future endeavors, and hopefully enjoys his time off. That's great. At this point, I will entertain a motion.
I'd move approval of resolution 1-2025.
Second.
Motion in a second. Any public comment? Hearing none. Roll call.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
Yes.
Director Wilkins,
Yes.
Director Tristan,
Yes.
motion approved.
Fantastic. Thank you, staff, for putting this together. Item 2 is discussion on relocating Truckee Donner Public Utility District facilities to TTSA-owned property. So we have,
We have Brian here from TDPUD to address the board. As you know, staff has been working with that hoc committee on land use. One of the discussions that's come up with the board was openness to perhaps sell some of our land to other government agencies. With that interest in mind, I've been talking with Brian about their site plans and future master plan of facilities. So Brian's here today to address the board on that topic.
Good morning, board members. I'm Brian Wright, the general manager with the Truckee Donner Public Utility District, and I really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time if I'd like to give a little bit of background and just kind of an understanding of what kind of our interests are as the Truckee Donner PUD moving forward as it relates to our facilities. As I understand, the TTSA has been taking on quite a project to really identify potential alternative use or surplusing of land that is owned by the agency. And I understand you might be developing a land use policy to kind of determine what the future looks like. And I'd like to offer an opportunity for the Truckee Donner Public Utility District to be a part of that. The district has been evaluating our facilities for many years now. For the last 5 years in particular, we've engaged with JK Architecture and Engineering to develop a facilities master plan. So really a long-term facilities master plan as our agency starts to outgrow our current facilities in terms of just capacity for our operation administration staff, our equipment, the kind of outdating and end of life cycle of some of our facilities over there has really become apparent. And it's really been kind of elevated or emphasized with the fact that we're facing some new pressures, environmental and regulatory pressures that are requiring a lot of public agencies to update their technologies in terms of alternative fuels for vehicles and fleet, for more efficiencies in our building use, and alternative, energy generation and fuel supplies. And really, with our facility over on Donner Pass Road, we've been there for many decades, and as we evaluate the opportunity to include and incorporate some of these new technologies, we face a lot of hurdles there. And so what we've done over the last 5 years with JK Architecture and Engineering is identify a couple different opportunities and plans that might work for us long term. One of those, for instance, is to develop our property with the Truckee Donner PUD owns some parcels over off of Pioneer Trails End up the top of Bridge Street, that rock quarry area around Trout Creek. There's an opportunity to develop that parcel or those parcels into more kind of comprehensive operations yard. One of the challenges there for us is separating our campus and the limited space over there, things like ingress, egress, and the opportunity to build a facility we really need. Another component of that study was to identify what it would look like for the Truckee Donner PUD to develop a single new off-campus facility and move away from our current parcels. And really, this has kind of revealed itself as the most beneficial and desired plan for a couple of reasons. It outlines or more kind of efficiently aligns with a couple other larger plans in our community. The Town General Plan includes an opportunity to relocate the Truckee Downer PUD off Donner Pass for more beneficial use of the parcel we're on, and to get some of the kind of industrial utility components off some of the main corridors of Donner Pass Road. We're across the street in close proximity to the school district. There's a lot of traffic congestion and ingress egress issues that we present in that corridor. And in terms of the larger general plan and goals, it makes a lot of sense for the Truckee Downer PUD to find other locations. And so through that facilities master plan update over the last 5 years, we've had some discussion with staff here at TTSA. Is there perhaps a new opportunity to reevaluate or consider some of the land along Jorger Drive? And I want to talk a little bit about that in terms of, I think, the mutual benefits that might offer for both our agencies and the community as a whole. A couple of those might be that, the Truckee Downer PUD's goals, missions, corporate values really align with TTSA. We are, one of the founding member agencies of the Martis Valley Groundwater Basin Management Group. We're one of the founding agencies of the Climate Transformation Alliance. We participate in the local Truckee workforce housing agencies. And so we have a lot of investment in the success of not only our community, but the public agencies that we're partners with and that we're neighbors with. And so I think from a kind of values and mission standpoint, at the end of the day, TTSA's service they provide their customer base is very much in alignment with and close to the mission of the Truckee Downer PUD. And so I think there's some synchronicity there. There's a lot of alignment. Also, in terms of some of the future opportunities, we are obviously one of the energy providers in our community. We're partnered with and kind of adjacent to Liberty Utilities, but the majority of the Truckee Basin here is served both water and power by the Truckee Downer PUD. And I think there's some opportunities. We've had a lot of great discussions with staff here at TTSA about future clean energy generation, energy efficiency opportunities. I think they're all not only regulatory pressures, but internal goals of all of our utilities here in our neighboring agencies to improve efficiencies, identify opportunities for clean energy generation, and other operational efficiencies that we might be able to leverage. So examples of that is, if we were to find the appropriate land opportunities, things like local generation with solar. We partnered with the town of Truckee and the airport a few years back on evaluating the potential for biomass facility. While it might not have penciled out at the, kind of in the scope and scale that it was evaluated a couple of years ago, there may be future opportunities for that. Where the Truckee Downer PUD can partner with the opportunity of being closer in proximity. I think there's some more engineering alignment and just logistical alignment. With the airport being nearby, town of Truckee, sanitation district, TSD, TTSA, the school district, Rec and Park. There's a lot of public agencies here in this corridor that I think we could really provide a lot of opportunities for in terms of energy efficiency, other opportunities like our fiber optic network, and our water infrastructure. So with that, I wanted to, thank for the opportunity to present to the board some of the things that we're thinking about on our end in terms of facilities master planning. Happy to answer any questions you might have as a board, and look forward to, future discussions.
Good, Brian. What's timing look like, and then how much land?
So the timing is as soon and as soon as possible, or as long as it takes. In terms of the Truckee Downer PUD has budget funds set aside for our facility development. There would be more than enough, I believe, for a land acquisition. Our JK study for a single campus facility is about 10 acres. If we wanted to accommodate other infrastructure, things as fuels, alternative fueling like solar energy, battery storage, biomass, we would probably want some additional acreage there. So I think kind of the back of the envelope estimate right now would be around a 20-acre parcel to accommodate that. The general this isn't a scientific number, but the general understanding is, for a solar facility, you're looking at about 5 to 7 acres per megawatt. And so, an additional 10-acre parcel may be really beneficial for this corridor. If we're going to talk about things like a microgrid or local energy resiliency for key customer accounts, which the TTFA is. In terms of timing, we have like I said, we have a reserve fund set aside for the facility development, something we could act on very quickly.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian. That's great information. Do you think it would most likely be a phased approach in terms of, it's a big move, right? You've got existing maintenance and office and customer service facilities, and to relocate all that is pretty big effort. Are you thinking like your first step would be to try to acquire a site and then potentially like move the maintenance operation first and then the office operation second, or some variation on that?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. The way our facility master plan is set up is exactly in that manner. It's essentially oversimplified as a 3-phase approach. Our most crucial and critical needs right now are things like coverage storage for critical equipment, critical kind of inventory, things like transformers, pipe, other infrastructure that we need to store out of the weather and elements. Vehicles, these fleet are becoming more complex, more expensive, as we all know, and really our most kind of critical and urgent needs are covered storage. So that would be phase 1. Phase 2 would be to design, build, and transfer over an operations facility. This is more of our water and electric field crews operations, with a final phase being administration and engineering, with a kind of brick and mortar front of the house type structure at the end. And that really looked like a multi-year, as you've had experience with the town of Truckee, that takes a long time to kind of plan and phase in.
Yeah.
And so we would take that pretty much a kind of 3 major phases, with the first being covered storage for our critical fleet infrastructure. We'd also we have an opportunity with our GPA partners, particularly Northern California Power Agency and our UAMPS partners that we schedule our energy through. If we had the kind of parcels available, we could act very quickly. There's a very short turnaround for things like solar generation or other alternative generation sources that we could incorporate in the early phase.
Just another comment, because Dale and I sit on the subcommittee that was created by the board, to kind of take a look at our land holdings and make recommendations back to the board on what we might want to do with those land holdings in the future. The topic of potentially the PUD being a receiver or an entity that we might sell some land to, came up. I think from my perspective, there's a lot of synergy there. The notion of, TTSA is land rich at the moment, and we've got, a pretty significant, capital project, long-term capital project need here. And if there's alignment where, we can sell property to another public agency, which generates some money, to help TTSA pursue our longer term capital needs. And then it also works. It also helps that other public entity out in terms of, their, future stability and siting. It just makes a lot of sense to me. So I think that the concept of, working with PUD to, figure out something that makes sense for both parties, I'm in concept, I'm in favor of it.
On that note, I forgot to mention, and I think it's an important additional fact that kind of threw out there. We tend to be focused in the Truckee service territory because that's our general service territory, outlines and is alignment with the town of Truckee. Obviously, TTSA is service territory has a much larger footprint, and you have other customers to consider and agencies. And so I think there's also an opportunity with the Truckee Downer PUD to add value to those agencies outside of the immediate basin here. What I mean by is offering opportunity for efficiencies here at the TTSA plant through energy programs. Obviously, us being in closer proximity really helps that from an engineering standpoint. I understand that there's a couple of other agencies out there in the Lake Tahoe Basin that need additional storage and facilities like that, and we may be an opportunity to partner there with our facilities development. Things like leasing seasonal space or shared resources in terms of heavy equipment and and I often say this community has a lot of different special districts that execute and serve their mission at a high level. One of the things we're challenged with is finding some synergy, as you mentioned, in terms of our facilities and fleet management. And I think we might have an opportunity there with both TTSA and other agencies that are member agencies.
Is Dale still with us?
Yes.
So,
Great. Dan, anything else?
I've got a couple comments and questions. If you can hear me, I'm still not sure if you can hear me.
we can.
Okay. Brian, thank you very much. One of the things you talked about, and I think you spoke eloquently to, was synergy. As representative at NTPUD, we look at it from a regional perspective, what can benefit the entire region. And one of the issues that I've heard from board members at NTPUD is workforce housing. And I'm curious, with the land that you would no longer need in the town of Truckee, is there a possibility that that could be utilized as workforce housing?
We haven't, the Truckee Downer PUD has not included any housing component in our facilities master plan. So I don't know what the opportunity would be beyond that. In terms of with the work that the Truckee Workforce Housing Agencies doing currently is identifying opportunities for both public employee housing development and acquisition. So it's, kind of everything's on the table for the Workforce Housing Agency. We haven't incorporated that component into our facilities master plan with the Truckee Downer PUD.
Okay. And as Director Wilkins said, we are land rich, and I think that we need to make sure that we utilize any of the surplus land that we currently have in the best interest of everybody. And I agree very strongly with a lot of the things that you spoke about. I think it all makes sense. I guess maybe my preference would be if there could be some component of workforce housing, because when we first looked at this, it was like, yeah, there's a lot of land there. Perhaps there could be workforce housing, but because of the being adjacent to the airport there, that kind of limited it, what we could do. So that would be one of the things that I would hopefully ask that we could look at down the road a little bit.
Thanks, Scott. Anything else?
No, I'm really glad that we're moving down this road. I think it's a good road to take.
Yeah, Director Clemens?
Yeah, so I'm playing a little catch up here. So have we done a financial analysis on lease versus sell and all that kind of stuff?
No.
So we haven't done any of that yet. Okay, so we're still early in this discussion.
Yes.
Got it.
And that was, well, let me first open it up to Dale. Did you have any questions for Brian?
It's not complete yet. We're in the stages of making arrangements for the airport and then our board president to sign the final paperwork. We're at the final stage.
that is, and I echo Director Smeltzer from Alpine Springs concern about the fueling facilities that are going to be located over the top of that Hardest Creek aquifer. You know, having fueling facilities on top of that aquifer makes me a little bit nervous. I know it's something that can be addressed and could be made safe for all those concerned. But this is an issue that I think that we should have at the forefront of the discussions with Truckee Downer PUD is the fueling facilities and how that is going to be implemented. Once again, I shared Director Smeltzer's concern about the school district's operation there with those huge full tanks. I don't know if the emergency spill reservoir that is in place is adequate to take any kind of a catastrophic calamity there. Just safeguarding that Martis aquifer, I think, should be paramount in these discussions, and hopefully when it comes time to review the final documents, that is adequately addressed. No further comments.
Thank you, Dale. Dan?
Yeah, just a follow-up comment. So I agree with Dale's comments. Obviously, environmental protection is important. I suspect PUD, who has a large well directly adjacent to the property that they would potentially be buying that's used to provide domestic water to Truckee residents, would be equally interested in protecting that aquifer. I don't have concerns there that our interests are aligned. One of the things that in one of the meetings that committee meetings that Dale and I ran with staff, that we started to think about was, utility access or lack thereof for a lot of our lands. And we've got, there's some utilities, in the vicinity of our property, but we've got a lot of property. And, the notion of, potentially if we were to do an agreement with the PUD, that it could be a cash deal, or it could be more of a deal where we're over constructing some of the utility infrastructure that would be needed for the PUDs and facilities, but that may provide better utility access for the remainder of the TTSA owned land, and just keeping that as something to consider as we're potentially pursuing an agreement here, I think would be wise.
Great. So Brian, the district has large buffer lands. It's a good thing for a treatment plant. We did a risk analysis and determined that there are available properties that do not appear to jeopardize our ability to perform our mission. Dale's concerns about our compliance point with the Regional Water Quality Control Board is not an end of the pipe. It's a groundwater that's a mile away from where we discharge, and so anything that impacts that unconfined aquifer or shallow aquifer could jeopardize our ability to meet our affluent permits. And so I think there's obviously staff concern and board concern that nothing happens in our watershed that would inadvertently cause us to violate our discharge permits. I agree with Dale. I think that, certainly that could be addressed and mitigated. Part of the reason to have a lot of buffer land also is to avoid conflicts with the public. I think as another utility, your staff would be a potentially good partner on this property. They understand the function we do. I know you guys have more customer interaction than TTSA or some of the member agencies. You know, we do a lot of work here to, you know, avoid odor issues and so on, but any concerns, you know, that, I don't know, how many, have you guys changed since the COVID, and how much kind of drop-in members of the public come on the site? We'd hate to invite somebody onto our property only then to start getting complaints. Again, we do a great job, like, and the staff in terms of, you know, odor control. We don't rarely get complaints. We've got Glenshire sitting just right up the hill there, but I'm just curious how much customer traffic you guys have. I wouldn't be so worried about your own personnel, but you have a sense of.
Yeah, we've seen it really decline over the last, I don't know. Obviously, COVID was a huge driver, but also technology. We've kind of converted over and transferred over to more app-based electronic transactions with our customer base. We still have kind of brick and mortar store customers that really want to come and pay a check and say hi to our customer service reps. But those have declined dramatically over the years. We're also incorporating, we have an item right now that we're developing to have kind of more kiosks throughout town where folks can pay their bills to the PUD from one of the other facilities, a store or 7-Eleven or what have you. So kind of that reverse ATM concept. I did want to touch base real quickly on the kind of the concern about the groundwater basin. We're partners in that. We have a high producing groundwater well right there behind where the bus barn is located, and maintaining the sustainability of that basin is a huge priority for us. We have a well over near the airport. We have a well here by the bus facility. We have another one across the river by the train tracks. And so we monitor very closely the entire Martis Valley groundwater basin. It's something we want to preserve as well. We have a lot of concerns with new constituents and contaminants being introduced to our basin. So we would be, I think, an ideal partner in that, just from a monitoring standpoint, where we can kind of overlap and provide and share data would be a great opportunity. With respect to the fuel, as Board Member Cox mentioned, I wanted to point out that the Truckee Donner PUD has already invested some capital investment in a shared fuel facility with the town of Truckee and the fire district. And so our goal and intent would be to avoid creating another fuel footprint within the basin. Utilizing that fuel facility at the town courtyard is something we plan to do for a very long time. It's a great partnership. It's a clean diesel fuel, and if we continue to evolve there, I think it's something we would focus on. When I mentioned fuel at the new facility, I'm referencing things like the new alternative fuels like electric vehicles or zero emission vehicles. You're probably going to see things like hydrogen fuel cells be a component of all of our new infrastructure. If you have heavy equipment, the technology doesn't lend itself for electrification of heavy industrial utility type fleet. So we're probably looking at other types of alternative fuels that wouldn't necessarily be contaminant risk to the basin. But obviously we would build the facility with all of its secondary containment and mitigation measures in place. That basin's, those wells are critically important to the service we deliver. So we're on board and partners there.
Great. Bringing up what Director Clement said, it's surplusing land. You have to comply with the Surplus Land Act. I'm not an expert in that. It's complicated, and there's probably the ability to make a land sale. Leasing gives the agency a lot more flexibility in what it does with its property. I don't know whether, right now, other agencies like Rec and Park has long-term leases for their park facilities, I believe from Truckee Donner PUD, from TSD. I'm just curious, your general perception on the acceptance level if instead of a land sale, it was a long-term lease. Is that also something that you need to be willing to negotiate? And I'm not asking for a firm answer. I'm just looking for a qualitative.
I have not discussed that with our board of directors. Right now, up to this point, the conversation's been under the context of purchase, as you mentioned, we're a leasing partner with a couple of other local public agencies. I think they have their value in certain kind of endeavors and arenas, but they do create some administrative challenges down the road. And I think in the end, if the financial numbers work out, our preferred methodology would be to engage in a land sale, but definitely everything's on the table. I think we would need to consider at least if that was what was offered, but I haven't spoken to our board about that.
Okay. And again, I don't know what hurdles exactly we're facing if we went to a declaring land surplus and whether, we have, how much control we have on who will get, there's first rights of refusal to, I believe, affordable housing and other stuff, and I'm not sure what constraints we have, so it's just an option we have. I also want to make it clear that, we as a board have been, had similar presentations. There's other folks in the community that have interest on this property. Truckee Fire District has been here expressing a desire for having land for their purposes. Sven's in the audience here from the Rec and Park District. They're constantly looking for additional space for stuff, and I think we're still trying to define how much surplus land we have, and it's something that I think we need to go in with our eyes open, and I don't know that we have to choose what's the best and greatest. If we make lands available, what's the greatest and best use of that land for our entire constituents here? And so it's going to be a process. As Dan mentioned, he's on a committee with Dale Cox, trying to develop kind of policy guidelines on how this land might be used. But it's certainly good to hear your vision of how you're interested in how that could be used, and potentially not only the wins for your agency, but the other agency, TTSA here, and the community as a whole. So good information. Great. Anything else? Anything from staff that you want to share?
It's been a pleasure talking with Brian and kind of putting this together. I would ask the board, is there any staff direction from the board to perhaps continue the discussion and take it to the next steps? Discuss with legal the parameters around the Surplus Lands Act, et cetera.
We got a question, Richard. Is Dan and I going to have any other committee meetings regarding any further surplus land discussion?
Yes. If you recall, we discussed putting everything on hold until we completed the transfer with the airport district. We should be wrapping that up and able to start meeting again in the next month.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, I guess, Richard, I think our plan was to have Dale and Richard develop sort of the policy guidelines that we could then use to go forward with. And so, as far as, I think Brian's got a master plan. They've got some stuff, but I think, I'm not sure how much more energy you want to invest in fleshing that out at this point, because I think we're looking for that policy item and then go forward.
I'm going to ask Brian a question, just from a timing standpoint, and in terms of moving forward in one direction versus another, what does that look like from the PUD's perspective? Because it sounds like you're trying to decide, are you going to invest in the existing facilities that you currently own, as well as building a remote facility on land at the end of Pioneer Trail, versus potentially pursuing land out here that TTSA owns? And are you kind of in a holding pattern until you get a cleaner read from TTSA as to our willingness to pursue this deal? And how much of an impact is that? If we're for instance another 6 to 12 months in developing a more comprehensive policy related to all of our property. You know, how does that affect what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, as it stands right now, our facilities master plan, we've kind of paused at the point where we've identified things like the amount of land we need, the amount of square footage of storage we need, the kind of logistics and space needed in our administrative and operation buildings. And so we have from our facilities master plan now our needs assessment and kind of a general engineered outline of space and buildings required, so to speak. It's, you know, from an engineering standpoint, it's probably at that 75% milestone right now where we're kind of got everything lined up. We haven't gone into actual design portions of it. As I mentioned earlier, we have a sense of urgency in terms of building covered and protective infrastructure for our fleet and raw materials. And so we have right now in front of us kind of a fork in the road, so to speak, where we can develop our current parcels. They really never meet our total needs, or do we have an opportunity to purchase something completely new as a one-size-fits-all campus? And so we have an opportunity to, I believe, you know, pause for some time, but we do have some pressures and urgency to develop those enclosed structures.
Okay. And just one of the things I'll offer, and I'll invite Dale to jump in if he disagrees with anything I'm saying. But, you know, some of the conversations Dale and I had in the committee meeting with staff were specifically related to other public entities. The PUD specifically came up. And, you know, I think from our perspective, from my perspective at least, there's a very high likelihood that any policy that I would recommend to the full board related to surplusing land, you know, other public agencies I think would be at the top of the list in terms of viable partners and viable entities that at least that I would feel comfortable surplusing land to. So even though we're not there yet on a broader policy, I can say at least from my perspective that that I would be supportive of other public entities being again top of the list for land transfers and sales from TTSA. So I think the question is, and again, I'd invite Dale to jump in, is the message we're sending to staff and PUD, you know, now that we need more time to develop our more robust kind of overall goals for our 900 plus acres, or are we willing to say, hey, we're confident enough that, you know, doing a deal for up to 20 acres-ish, you know, with Truckee Donner PUD, that's reasonably going to fall within our larger policy anyway, and so that we can provide an indication sooner rather than later that, you know, to the PUD that, you know, that this is a viable proposition, that we've got a lot of details to work through on.
Right.
So, and I'll allow Dale, yeah, please jump in if there's anything about what I said that you disagree with or have an alternate opinion on.
You know, Dan, you handled the topic very well. This is something that we discussed. It's, you know, pretty, you know, completely in our committee meetings. When you talk about 900 acres, there's going to be far less than 900 acres because I feel that the land that is on the opposite side of the bus barn over there that shadows the Legacy Trail, I think that land is environmentally sensitive, that we should keep in a situation that the public can enjoy as they use the Legacy Trail. But the property that we're discussing adjacent to the school district is something that we can move forward with. I know that, at least on my part, I feel that cooperating with the Truckee Downer PUD is a very important step, not only for the town of Truckee, but for also the public utility. I think working with the public utility and the town of Truckee is in the region's best interest. And I look forward to further discussions at the committee level so that we could put together a policy that everybody will be able to get on board with, and that we can move this forward.
Thanks, Dale. Yeah, I'm not sure how we, I don't want, the process of developing the policy necessarily to, limit our ability to move forward. I mean, hopefully you guys can move forward in a timely basis. I guess my concern is we don't have 900 acres. I forget how many acres we have. I wish I did remember that, but having your 20 acre rough number helps. Is that going to be the one and only use out there? And so basically those other folks that I mentioned, and there's a lot of other folks obviously looking for property as well. What we want to do is if we're going to make that land, the surplus land, available to optimize it. And so, is that, I don't have a sense right now whether that's going to be a one-shot deal with your 20 acres. Not all land is equally accessible. And so what fire walls get created by putting in your parcels, or does it prohibit access to other parcels? And so it'd be nice to, if the board, elects to make that land available, that we kind of really optimize that and, provide the greatest bang for the buck, whether that's parks or I know TCPUD has indicated a need for off-site winter storage of facilities. And so, yeah, I mean, we're breaking new ground here, Brian. We've had this property since the facility was built in the 70s. There was a long time where it was, nobody was allowed on it. We've opened it up for the Legacy Trail. We've opened it up for the bus barn. And so it's, at least this board, I think it's somewhat new, and hopefully we can come up with a good policy to make good use of that property. I think what you're hearing is, positive. I don't think we're ready to sign an MOU or anything yet, but I think we're trying to move towards a way to make that land a benefit for the agency. That's our primary goal, as well as the community as a whole. I think that weeding process is going to be, it's tricky, if we're, sorry, you guys are both here, competing interests. How do we, pick which is, what we're allowing, and how does the Surplus Land Act possibly play into that?
Yeah.
Is a little tricky. We got to kind of figure out how to deal with that. But I have a clearer image of, your goals, and I think that they generally appear to align with the agency's goals in terms of doing this whole surplus land study. So be patient.
So I guess the question, Richard, in terms of direction that you'd like to get from us or not, could you provide a little clarity?
Sure. I just don't know if there's any, level of interest, perhaps give with Brian, look at the property that's available and start to roughly identify what perhaps you'd be interested in. Perhaps share the land use risk assessment with Brian to make sure that there's nothing that was identified in it that conflicts with their future use that might be a deal killer for his use. So that's what I was looking at, is anything to discuss those type items.
Yeah, I have a point of clarification.
Sure.
Sounds like the committee is asking whether or not the board would be okay with a fast track on a 20-acre parcel ahead of the policy, is what I heard a few minutes ago, okay? And if I didn't hear that, please let me know. But it sounds like you're looking for guidance on, do we get the policy done first, or do we go do this separately, or do we try and do them both, or what's the approach? I don't know what the availability is of the gentleman on the committee to be able to go do all that work, one shot. But it sounded to me like there was a kind of a quiet ask on, hey, we could potentially do this ahead of the policy potential.
Yeah, and maybe a nuance on that. My suspicion is to actually get a land deal done, we could easily take a couple of years. To get through Surplus Land Act requirements and to figure out what's the right property. Are we both comfortable with it? I mean, the airport land exchange we dealt with took a decade, right? So my suspicion is that the committee work and this conversation I think the committee work and this conversation could occur in parallel. And we could potentially be at a point where we would actually adopt whatever our policy is relative to surplusing land ahead of actually doing a land deal, but be working kind of on both things concurrently, was my thought, if that works for both us and for the PUD. So, and I think Dale and I probably have the benefit of having talked about this, in the committee a couple of times, and kind of, looking at the site plans of the land we own, kind of looking at where the bus barn is, looking at what might be a logical parcel for the PUD to move on. And, you all don't have the benefit of that information as part of this conversation right now. So I think it's really just a question, or are we open to moving forward in parallel on these two issues, as opposed to putting this, kind of out in front of it. That's probably how I would see it. But thanks for your summary, Doug.
No worries.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, it'd be interesting whether it'd be beneficial to have an agenda item come up where we revisit our surplus land with the committee, and with our attorney, Luann, get another refresher on the Surplus Land Act and how this might play out with I believe there's competing interests out there, and how we can move forward with, if we're gonna make these lands available, how do we do this in a way where, we have some control over it? I still not concerned, I just don't understand exactly how the Surplus Land Acts and how we would move towards an actual directed project where we have some control over that. And so, maybe in March, we can have an item to discuss this further.
Okay.
I feel like we are aware of the requests that are out there. I think anybody who has a demand for this property is kind of let us know. I'd be surprised if there's some other process, and I don't think we're going to make any decisions at this next meeting, but process-wise, I think that would be helpful.
yeah, no, I think it's important to full board have the same level of information that Dale and I have on the subcommittee, and we're not quite there yet. So, and as Richard pointed out, we kind of hit pause on the subcommittee work,
Right?
because we wanted to get we thought it was important to get the land exchange with the airport district finalized, because that creates certainty on an additional 40 to 50 acres of land that we would transfer to them, that we would no longer be developing a policy around, because we won't own it anymore.
Right.
And the additional land we would be acquiring from them then would be in the mix as part of the policy. So we just wanted to get certainty on that before going too much further down the path. That's the reason we've been on pause for a little while.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I'll take as staff direction, agendize item for March's meeting to ask for further discussion about surplus land act, and how we navigate with that. Yeah, Dale? We can try and make that happen.
Great, and also, Dan, I don't know if it would, interfere with your, agenda, but I will be at the, in town for the March meeting. It would be nice for us to also have a meeting shortly after our March board meeting at the committee level, Dan. So that, we could maybe further discuss any discussion from the March board meeting. Does that sound possible?
Yeah. That's great. I think the committee getting together with council and staff to kind of brainstorm what the agenda item would entail to move this process forward would be great.
Sure.
Okay.
I've got a question, if I may. So what I'm hearing is we're sort of going down two different roads at once. We're looking to create a policy, but we're also looking to advance somehow with Tahoe Donner Public Utility.
Well, I don't even know that it's directly with Tahoe Donner, Truckee Donner PUD. I think it's.
I'm sorry, Truckee Donner.
Yeah, that's all right. You got me tongue-tied also. I think that the purpose of the meeting is to kind of, I mean, the policy is important, but I think we need to talk, you know, we understand who the players are out there who are interested in actually developing the property. And so I think having a meeting for us to kind of move forward on both fronts. I think the policy is partly, I think, dictated on the land use demands or requests that are out there. And so, yes, I think you're right. We're going to move forward in both fronts.
Okay, I'm just curious if there needs to be a policy in place before from a legal standpoint. Maybe Josh could help us with that.
Sure. And Director Wilson, it wouldn't be necessary. I mean, it's probably a good idea knowing that there are others out there, that the board make a decision first on how it would handle any surplus land and who that land might go to. But there's no legal requirement that be done. The board has the discretion to determine to surplus land and lease or sell to a particular entity if it wants to do that.
Thank you.
Okay, I look forward to the March meeting. Dan?
Yeah, Dale was.
I think he was trying to coordinate timing of the subcommittee meeting. So I don't think we need to.
We'll reach out and do
Yeah.
that offline.
Great. Brian, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. Thank you,
Yeah.
Brian.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, if there's nothing else, we're going to close item 2 at this time and move on to item 3, which is the approval of the financials for month ending January 31. Do we have Liz on?
Liz is remote, phone only, she's at a conference, so y'all's gonna handle the agenda item. In mind of Liz being out, if there's any detailed questions, Michelle and I'll note them down and we'll get with Liz and then provide answers.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you. Good morning, board members. I'm going to review today the financial slides that were provided in your board packet. The first slide is showing you the revenue for Fund 10 and for Fund 2. We do not show Fund 6 on this as it's just the interest that is the revenue in Fund 6. As of January, we were at 59% for the fiscal year, and Fund 10 is showing slightly above that, and that's due to receiving all the funds from the different counties. We also received approximately $122,000 from surplus sales in January. And Fund 2 is showing right on target. The next slide is showing our budget to expenses. Fund 10 is trending slightly lower than expected at 55%. It's been mentioned to the board that the project timelines have delayed some of our expenditures in Fund 2 and Fund 6. There will be updated project timelines and associated cash flows as part of our next budget process.
When's that?
We'll start the budget process in March and April.
Thank you.
The next slide is our total cash balances, and you can see that we're following the expected trend. We did receive our teeter payments from the counties, and the line is higher from the previous year, and that's due to the fact that we had our rate increase.
Michelle, I'm just going to pause you there. We've got a new board member, a lot of financial information getting thrown at you. I don't know the kind of pattern that you see on the total cash, whether you've had a chance to talk with staff about why the lines look the way they look.
Yeah, been through a good bit of it.
Okay.
I'll ask a couple questions on Fund 6 and then at the end. And
Okay.
We'll go from there.
Okay.
I'm a finance guy, so we're good.
Okay, you understand how we receive our revenues from the county and just 3 different months, and that's why you see kind of the average burn rate and then a jump. Okay, just wanted to make sure
No, we're good.
you're up to speed. Okay, go ahead, Michelle.
So we received the teeter payments, and that's why the line is showing higher this year versus last year. And that is all that I have. So we're just asking for approval on the financial statements for January.
I have
And questions?
a quick question on Fund 6. I'll ask management since the budget's not in process, but it's got a $12 million line item budget on it, and we spent $156K. So I'm assuming most of the 12 million is going to go into next year at this point into the process, or you think we've got other issues here and the 12 million becomes 80 million next year?
Yeah, no, that is not likely to become $80 million. It is potentially going to become 14.
Okay,
That's always a possibility. So when we put together the budget for capital, we kind of made a lot of worst case scenario assessments. We haven't had a lot of capital done here at the facility for 10, 15 years. And so we were making some assumptions based on pre-COVID estimates for capital that came from our master plan. And what we did know about those estimates is that COVID blew them out in the water. And so we made some in-house engineers' estimates, added some increases to those so that we could at least somewhat accurately budget. Got into design on a few of those projects, and we're kind of at the stage on a lot of those projects where we're getting firmer estimates for construction costs. So we will have much better numbers for next FY on that.
Are any of these items that are on here, priority 1, 2, or 3, going away that won't be done?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, the timeline on the capital projects,
Yeah, 100 years, I get it.
right, and the design phase always takes longer. I think the 12 million estimated construction beginning this year, and they're just not kicking off. And it's a good catch. 12 million this year. I'm not sure what the budget called for fiscal year 26. We have a 5-year.
Are we thanking for digestion improvements project?
Well, just for overall, we had Fund 6 5-year capital improvement thing. It was 12 million in fiscal year 25, and then it was probably something still in the double-digit millions. And so,
Correct.
depending on when the kickoff for those projects go out, the 12 millions roll into next year, plus maybe we're actually starting those projects, those other ones, same year, so that the 12 may go, say, to 14, it may go to 20.
Yeah.
It all depends on when that happens, but it's
And we're at-
eventually,
We're at phases in design at this point where like I said, the numbers are a lot more refined for schedule and for total cost. So we're going to be able to build a little bit better picture into the capital. At this point, conversations I've had with Liz is effectively having them pushed forward. It basically, we do like a quarterly update on CIP so that we have a better forecast of when things get dire or don't. And so delaying the projects at this stage is not having a negative impact, but we want to be dialed in much better as we progress.
Thank you.
okay. Any other questions for staff on the financials? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the financials. Motion by Director Cox. Second by Wilkins. Any other comments? Hearing none. Do the roll call?
Director Wilson,
Yes.
Yes.
Director Clement,
Yes.
and Director Tressman.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Okay. Item 4 is kind of an ministerial item, adjusting the rates for our general counsel. That was part of our contract.
That's correct.
So I don't know if there's any more background you need.
I did receive a question, so I was going to cover just the increases and the dollar amount, so the board was aware. So Josh is our principal. He would go from 360 to 370, so a $10 an hour increase. That reflects that 2.9%. The op council or principal 2 was 315 going to 340. An associate 1, 275 to 280. An associate 2, 240 to 250. And then paralegal takes a pretty good jump from 120 to 200. So those are the pre and new numbers for the 2025 rates.
Hey, 120 to 200 is not 2.9%.
It reflects 67%. Primarily, our legal services are Josh. So looking back at the last year of invoices, it's with the exception of a few $100s for paralegal or associate. It's primarily for Josh and his work that he does for us.
Why did the 2.9 doesn't apply to the paralegal position?
When Josh reflected the 2.9, he was focusing on himself because he's the one we primarily deal with.
Right?
But in their rate structure, they cover the other positions as
Okay.
well.
Yeah, I agree. 99% of our hours are probably from the general. Okay, I will, looks like you're looking for board approval for the rate adjustment.
Yeah, it must be approved by the board.
I'll make that motion that we approve the rate adjustments for legal services as outlined in the staff report.
Moved and seconded. Any other comments? Hearing none, roll call.
Director Wilson,
Yes.
Yes.
Director Clement,
No.
Director Tressman.
Yes.
Motion approved.
All right. Moving on to item 5, presentation and update on the digestion improvement project.
Good morning, board members, President Tressman, Scott Fleming, Senior Engineer with TTSA, here today to provide you guys an update on the digestion improvements project. Just want to make sure you're good on your end with Teams. Cool. So I included this slide at the start. I think it's important for us just to touch base on why this project is occurring. Having a new board member might help him a bit too to give some context. So basically summarizing the slide, there's quite a bit of context there, but we've got a very old facility at this point. Most of our infrastructure in the building is pushing 50 years. The boilers are at the end of their service life. They're steam operated, and it's one of the last facilities in the state and in our region that has steam boilers operating our heat demand, as well as we're out of compliance with modern day codes and standards. And we have challenges with a number of other issues with the equipment. So just wanted to include that high level point just to kind of remind everybody what's going on with this project. So we defined project goals for success internally with staff and with our consultant. Those are outlined here. This is a summary of them. Basically looking into the future and with the equipment, we want to see 25-year service out of the boilers with heat demand for the facility at minimum, if not stretching further. We want to transition the facility over from steam to hot water to modernize us and make it more manageable for the equipment servicing. One of the operational goals was to be able to operate parallel thermophilic operation of digesters for 29, 30, and 33. Currently, we can only do that with digester 33 based off the boiler output and also our heat exchangers. We want to modernize equipment in the facility, ensuring compliance with applicable codes and standards, provide safety improvements, while at the same time during construction activities not disrupt operations and maintain our existing facilities. Additional goals were achieve greenhouse gas reductions where possible and provide offsets with funding potential, and then coordinate the improvements with our other ongoing projects. And feel free to jump in if you guys have questions along the way. We can wait till the end of the Q&A, or if you guys pop some mind, I don't mind. So with that, we're going to jump into what's been going on with the project specifically right now. So with Brown and Caldwell, before I get into it, they were tasked not just with jumping straight into final design with a 30% bid deliverable, but basically bridging the gap from our preliminary design report provided by Jacobs, formerly CH2M Hill, to finalize the selection and sizing of equipment for the project scope that was not clearly defined in the PDR received from Jacobs. So I picked a few key components from the project and from our basis of design verification report that we're working on finalizing. That's outlined here that we're going to go over today. So those are the boiler sizing and building, the digester 31 floating cover challenges, the waste gas burner, and then some alternative technologies on the table as part of this project that open us up to potential additional funding sources and provide other benefits that we'll get into. So that's kind of the focus of today's update. So the first one we're going to discuss is the boilers, specifically the heart of the project as I look at it. And kind of want to spend a few minutes. So we've got this map here that was developed, and this is an overview of the existing and proposed heating plan for the facility. As you can see, it's kind of quilt work. You know, we have a pretty diverse strategy for heating. I can attest a little bit to the reason behind that. The facility was built in 1976, primarily focused on using steam for process and comfort heating. So if you walk the facility, you'll see a series of unit heaters. The digesters convert steam over to hot water for process heat loops that heat the digesters. We went through a series of expansions in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and the existing boiler output, coupled with the fact of remote locations of some of the newer facilities, triggered us to go with natural gas or electricity instead. And so what you'll see here is the blue-green colors are primarily the existing steam proposed hot water conversion with the hatching. The red and the yellow are natural gas and electricity facilities. This specific layout and plan was coordinated with the nutrient removal alternative project evaluation that we're doing ongoing with Carollo. And the reason we need to coordinate the two projects is because we're proposing the potential to cut out a number of facilities we currently are heating with either steam, electricity, or natural gas. So we want to make sure we're not long-term planning to heat those facilities with new boiler hot water output that then in turn is just going to be cut off in 5 to 10 years if we were to go with one of those other alternatives. So just to give it a little more context, the facility is connected through a series of pipe galleries located underneath the corridors. The intent of the project is to reutilize those existing routings with new hot water loop piping. The steam piping is useful life. Anyway, at this point, we're starting to see major failures on the piping lines, so they need to be replaced. At that point of replacing the steam lines, it just made sense logically to upgrade the unit heaters throughout all the facilities over to hot water, convert, or replace. They're also aging to tie into the new boilers.
Scott, does this digestion improvement project, is it turnkey including, going into all these not remote, but all of our buildings that we're talking about changing over the heating system in?
Yes.
So it's not, okay.
But, so there's a couple nuances to that. Brown and Caldwell is not tasked with specifically modernizing all of the heating strategies in all the facilities. So, like for example, at the end of the quarter, the end of run that's historically been heated with steam is MPPS, multi-purpose pump station at the bottom end of the plant. That facility is currently on steam. Short term, we need to continue to heat it, but just to meet process heating demand requirements, it's not going to be heated to comfort levels like 67 degrees in here. But we're just going to heat it to the minimum to ensure we don't have process impacts, keep the water from freezing. And then occasionally when staff need to go in and do work in that facility, they'll be able to turn the thermostat up and provide some temporary heat into the room to do work, and then it'll be programmed to be set back down for the heat points. Long term, we don't want to spend the additional funding to have them do a full analysis on every facility, as we might not be utilizing these. So we basically ask maintenance internally to audit all the facilities to determine if any of the heating currently supplied in the buildings is not enough to support that facility, and if anywhere, we're going to provide additional heating into that room. But otherwise, the unit heaters are going to be replaced in kind with similarly sized units, just with hot water instead of steam as part of the project.
And the energy source for the steam production?
So currently, we burn a combination of fuel oil or diesel and or biogas, just depending seasonally on how much biogas we're putting out. The intent with the new boilers, which we'll get there, are dual fuel boilers that instead of using fuel oil or diesel, would be using natural gas or biogas, just depending on production output.
Hey, Rochelle,
Yes, can you hear?
can I chime in just real quick?
Okay.
When we talk about biogas, are we talking about the methane gas generated from within the plant?
Yes, Dale, that is correct. And I'll use biogas or digester gas interchangeably throughout this presentation. They're, more or less.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions on the overview map? So Brown and Caldwell was tasked with calculating out our min and maximum heat demand for sizing of the boilers. Scrapp's got kind of a lot of information on it, but they overlaid, the red line is our top current and forecasted out more or less max heat demand at 6,125 MBH. And then on the bottom end, they had an initial tech memo that drafted out at 1,311 MBH, but then it was revised in a second tech memo to us to 888 MBH. Jacob's number from the PDR was 550. Why we care about the bottom end is these boilers have a specific limit on turn down depending on the sizing and efficiency outputs. So Brown and Caldwell was tasked with also providing us a boiler recommendation that could serve as an N+1 year of duty and a standby boiler for the system sizing. They basically laid out there were two options that more or less serve the agency's needs for sizing. However, the 200 horsepower boiler does not have a lot of output on the upper end. In the future, we have additional heat demand requirements, and likewise will require more radiator heating or output on the turn down side. So with that, they ended up recommending to us the 250 horsepower boiler with the 10-to-1 turn down on natural gas or 6-to-1 turn down on digester or biogas. So we can achieve what we're currently doing with 3 boilers with 1 duty boiler and then having a backup standby boiler for servicing or any failure issues we should have. So that's kind of the takeaway from this graph is if we go ahead and end up moving forward with 250 horsepower boiler, we'll be able to achieve what we historically limited to do with 3 steam boilers. And I'll kind of do a comparison of the boilers in this next slide. So I wasn't sure whether or not to include this one. It's kind of a lot of information, how much you guys want to dig into it, but putting aside that dimensionally it's not shown to scale because I had fit it on the slide. It's just a comparison to give you guys a sense of the changes we're deviating from our historic process heat and comfort heating strategy versus the new strategy. So most modern facilities are running these Cleaver-Brooks hot water boilers or fire tube boilers. They're incredibly reliable and have a very good service life. I think some of the other people in this room worked at facilities where they put in Cleaver-Brooks, and so there's a background. And a number of the facilities we toured and we looked at Nutrien also were operating Cleaver-Brooks boilers. So kind of an industry staple that's become the basis of design. And with that, I just want to highlight, you can see the output that a single boiler can do here versus what our existing boilers do at 48 years old, the 3 of them. Each of those boilers was rated for a 1,607 BTU an hour output versus with 1 boiler, we can achieve more than triple that output while still achieving a 10-to-1 turn down. So just kind of something to highlight here.
We currently have 3 of the existing steam, and the design currently stands at 2 of these proposed, one of which really looks like it's sized to handle the entire demand, and so you just have that second one as the redundancy in case one goes down for maintenance.
That is correct, and there'll be some operational control strategies to ensure that you're swapping back and forth. We don't want equipment idling, sitting by at long duration. So what that strategy will look like will depend on ops and maintenance and the preferred operating. But as a whole, yeah, that was the set point for the basis was N+1. We want a prime, whatever the count is that we need to get our output, and one additional to support it. So, and we did look at like some other alternatives I don't list here, like going with a bunch of smaller boilers, but the problem is the footprint of the building grows and then the cost grows exponentially along with the redundancy. So it just simplifies a lot of things if we can get down to just operating with one boiler on the strategy with the gas. So I put a photo in here just to kind of give a frame of reference for those that haven't been in the digester control building currently in the space constraints there.
Hey, you're fine.
Okay. So this is just an overview slide. I'm going to show you, and it's going to be almost impossible to see depending on your screen quality, but the takeaway here is that this is the inside of that previous photo I just showed you with those 3 existing steam boilers squared up in blue there. And then I overlaid the red for the potential footprint for those 250 horsepower boilers to give you a sense of the space difference. And this isn't even showing the vertical clearance challenges. It's not possible through the existing openings in the building or the clearance between the floor and the headroom above to fit in with the piping and everything else, the 250 horsepower boilers. And looking at smaller boilers in the sequencing for winter output, we just constructability wise get into too many challenges with trying to maintain operational control over the facilities, providing heat demand while also doing the project. I don't know if this had been highlighted to you guys before, kind of driving where this conversation is going to go in a minute. So I just kind of want to give the context. On the next slide, I provide referencing some of those goals with the project. The other issue and challenge with using the existing facility, not to mention fitting them in the building, but with those smaller boilers, we're not going to be able to long-term hit our heat demand needs for the project, and we're not going to be code compliant with the stacks for the boiler. So current codes now require or stipulate that we have to put the stacks for the boiler exhaust outside of the range or the envelope that the digesters are in currently. And I state the language there for you guys so you're aware. So we can't utilize an existing digester control facility for that reason. There's a whole bunch of electrical challenges too with the existing footprint and building, trying to coordinate doing the work in that. And it's just going to result in more cost than just us greenfielding in the building. So that was the shared consent between us and speaking with the consultants that any potential savings we get from reutilizing the existing building and trying to coordinate a complex stab in and doing smaller boilers is going to be offset just by those challenges versus just building. That's what's driving. I just wanted to have that conversation with you guys so you don't ask that question after this presentation. Why aren't we utilizing the existing boiler? So with that, I guess, is there any questions about that point? I just want to hit that one home and kind of answer any. There's other supporting equipment in there too that's going to have to be relocated if we were trying to repurpose that room as well, I guess, to add to that point. So we have currently steam and hot water heat exchangers in the room. We have water softening equipment as well. We have currently our CO2, some of our CO2 equipment is located in that room. It's a very constrained room. Kind of to finalize that point before I move on. It's just really not a feasible option for us while maintaining operation.
Some of those other non-boiler processes continue to be utilized in that building, the heat exchangers, you mentioned a couple other things. So still use that space.
Yes, and the lower level as well. So the bulk of the process equipment related to the actual digester heating element, so the heat exchangers, the pumps, they're going to be upgraded but still kept in the same areas of the building. So we're not relocating those pieces of equipment. We're only relocating the pieces of equipment that really need to be relocated for the project. So
the new building's going to house the boilers, gas supply, hot water coming out.
Yeah, and a few other things. So like the gas scrubbing equipment is currently located on the roof of the building. We'll talk about with that briefly, but the new site layout is relocating that gas scrubbing equipment to be in line with the piping on its way to the boilers. What other pieces of equipment I'm just thinking in my head here? There's some water conditioning and makeup water equipment that will need to be near the boilers if we are going to have to supplement, as well as some loop pumps for those boilers providing water to the primary facility. But it's small relative to like when you go down and digester buildings to heat exchangers and other those things are still remaining in those general areas adjacent to the digesters where it makes sense. So with that, we started evaluating, okay, well, if we can't utilize the existing digester control building, where do we put these boilers? Where do they live? So I drafted this aerial figure and marked it up to help kind of communicate to you guys our alternatives that were identified by the consultant and staff. There were 4 alternatives that were selected to evaluate based off of a couple different criteria we'll get into. I just want to first show the alternatives. So the first one was repurposing the existing chlorine building and retrofitting it to accommodate boilers, as it's not in use at this point for anything other than storage. Alternative 2 was to relocate them to a new building adjacent to the chlorine building in that upper left-hand corner of the slide, like right as you turn into the administrative parking lot. The third alternative was a PSA retrofit. PSA stands for pressure swing absorption. We no longer utilize that facility. We used to generate oxygen on site. Now we take O2 chemical deliveries as it's more economical than maintaining that facility. So now it's become basically a void space that maintenance has been ongoingly demoing with time. And then the fourth alternative that was discussed was the Riverside location. So just a couple other points I can make on this slide. There were some challenges with utilizing space immediately adjacent to the digester. One of those issues is on the plant, I guess you could say the east side, or what we would call, I think, plant north, the future Class A biosolids batch tanks. If we are pushed by regulatory requirements long term, we're going to need it's time and talent. We're going to need that space for that potential Class A biosolids, so we can't utilize that space immediately adjacent for a new boiler building. And then secondarily, you're strategizing with the consultant where the existing fuel oil tank is located and the flare is the potential living space for a long-term high-strength waste strategy for receiver tanks and feeding into digesters. So with the digesters and potential long-term, if we ever need to construct a new digester, we want to preserve that space as close as possible to the digester control building and the digesters for those key critical facilities. And that's partially the reason why we did not place the building adjacent to the digester for a proposal. Sure, I got my points here. So with that, we developed a criteria, and I couldn't put it on the slide because you guys wouldn't be able to read it in a presentation setting, but we have a selection matrix that actually provides scoring for this, and the report will be readily available for you guys to read through if you're interested as well. But we came up with a criteria that determined the selection and scoring of the preferred alternative. I won't read through these for the sake of time, but the highlights are that we're trying to avoid relocation of any of these components for future. We don't want to double pay for things. You know, we want to ensure we have enough space around the footprint of the building for the support facilities. We want to keep it close and not have super lengthy runs of piping from a location way out in the middle. It's got to be safe and availably accessible for ops and maintenance, and the cost is always like, and these were all equally weighted. So we didn't put any weight to one over the other when we did our matrix for selection. So with that, what are the results? So as you can see, alternative 1 and 2 got axed, and you're going to ask why. Well, as we were doing our decision matrix for the selection for the alternative, and this is kind of a sneak peek into what you guys will probably be hearing the next month or two with the nutrient removal alternative, it was identified by Carollo that site over by that existing chlorine building is highly valuable for any potential future expansion of the facility for water improvements. So that immediately eliminated those first 2 options, not to mention the length of run of pipe. We don't have any infrastructure to tie into over there for the hot water blue piping, so it's quite a long run. In the proposal, the baseline alternative proposal that we had for multiple consultants when they did the job was to use alternative 2 in green. Brown and Caldwell's proposal had above grade piping that would need to be protected from freezing and damage out there, and it was going to be pretty cost prohibitive. which eliminated alternative 2 from the running. However, also in conflict with nutrient removal, it was a no-go. PSA was given a hard look, but due to the constraints with the existing structure and the proximity to the O2 tanks, it was outruled primarily because we just don't want to have an oxidizer immediately adjacent to flammable gas. It just seems like it was, more or less a safety hazard for staff and everybody around, not to mention a large portion of our maintenance staff utilized the building adjacent as well. So it's a nice fire break not to have a building shared with our maintenance staff. And that really left alternative for the Riverside location that was weighted the highest based off of greenfielding and building.
Hey, Scott,
Yeah.
looking at this figure, the little brown call out that calls out digester 30,
Yes.
I've seen a bunch of dirt there, that's quite a bit bigger than the, green squares of the potential. Why is that space not? It's close to the digesters. It looks like it's not part of the nutrient removal
Yeah.
site. Why was that site not considered?
Yeah, so we currently have a septic receiving station that we don't utilize, but it's located over there. But also Building 71, which is the bottom left corner, that's our dewatering facility, has a huge amount of electrical connections made between it and Building 27 switchgear, which is basically in between that dirt patch and where Truckee Donner PD's primary feed for the entire facility comes in.
We've got some underground facilities that we can't see here that would make that
Substantially, yeah.
not viable. Okay.
Yeah, it would be extremely
Curious.
expensive. We would have to basically offline 71 for a substantial time in order to relocate a conduit or build it in parallel, and then also the septic receiving station would be demolished. It looks bigger in the space than it really is, and it's also the primary access point for backing up trucks into and accessing the digester building. So by building a new boiler building that would be separated from it, you'd be blocking primary access corridor for backing up into the digester building to service all that other equipment, not just the boilers, but the heat exchangers and et cetera. So we want to maintain the doors on that plant south side of the building. And also it's got like a loading dock currently now on the backside there. Any other questions? I guess we can talk a little bit about the pros of the Riverside location, and there are some cons, but the proposed routing of the piping really lends itself to keeping the digester gas piping on the roof of the corridor. There wouldn't be any potential incursions by staff hitting it, it'd be out of the way in a much safer location. We don't want to route digester gas piping in a building ideally at this point, so all the gas piping would remain outside except for when it enters into the boiler building to be burned. Additionally, the hot water loops would be able to tie into the pipe galleries down below, so we'd minimize excavation requirements or building above grade hot water loop piping for that site location. It's also very central for the facility. So you talk about placing boilers and hot water loops. You try to identify the most central location, and that's both in the current layout of the facility as well as long-term versus alternative ones. And 1 and 2 were very much stubbed out way out at the end of the loop. With this location, the loop could be centrally placed, not just for our current operations, but if we go forward with an alternative facility design in the long term with nutrient removal, we're still having our boilers in a best bang for our buck for placement as far as it goes.
Scott, excuse me, Scott, I've got a question. The Riverside location, how long is the proposed road, and do you foresee any issues perhaps getting it permitted? Because that seems like it's right on the bank that starts to slope down to the river.
Yes, that's a great question, Scott. So 2 things to that. The stationing right now on the preliminary alignment, I want to say it's about 12 to 1,300 feet long for the roadway. As far as permitting goes, this is actually something that I think has been long overdue for the facility. A lot of wastewater treatment plants in the state of California and in the country have perimeter roads around them for access points for both fire concerns as well as for access. Currently, we don't have any access behind the primary clarifier on that side, and the intent of the alignment of the road is to keep it, and I'll jump to that slide, is to keep it within our fence line, basically right behind the board meeting room here along the fence if you turn around there. So we would try to minimize grading requirements and utilize the bulk of the existing slope while maintaining appropriate slopes for fire access as well as construction vehicles. The road proposed is a 25-foot wide roadway. And, it does have some tree removal to it, but we've tried to make effort to maintain the bulk of the larger trees on the property. Typically in our fence line, the governing bodies that we answer to are really the state water board. So, ultimately the water board is going to be the one that dictates if they have concerns over water quality impacts. But we're going to be maintaining all of the existing drainage features for the rock stumps on site so that if we did have a spill of a chemical, this is just one additional buffer that stops it from making it to the river. So I think if anything long-term, as long as we have the appropriate best management practices in place, we shouldn't have issues getting the road permitted. It doesn't go through standard permitting like most towns have to go through for us, for more or less our JHA in that case for the facility.
Thank you.
So you can see here as well the proposed alignment of the road tying into the backside of the facility red line. The primaries there. Additionally, you see some asphalt laid in between the new proposed boiler building and the primary clarifier. That's ideally the placement of a couple of those supporting pieces of equipment, specifically gas scrubbing equipment that we need to have, and a new waste gas burner with appropriate setbacks. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. I gave this just as for fun to see, kind of give you guys, everybody wants to see a visual of what the building might look like. This is still preliminary from the structural engineer, but it's a pretty simple building. We have some discussions ongoing about the cost of building materials and selecting the most economical option that makes sense for this utility building. They're proposing reinforced CMU block with standing seam metal roof building. It's pretty basic, to be honest. You just need roll-up doors to provide the necessary access to the boilers to be able to pull out and rod the tubes, as well as if you need to pull the boilers. So the road would provide the access, and then you would be able to just open a roll-up door and pull out the boiler. You can see here there's a tie-in to the existing corridor, so staff could access the building without having to plow snow or potentially, have to go out in the elements, versus some of those other building site locations would require us to have staff walk across the yard to get to it. Very accessible next to the backwash tank there. Other than that, there's a separate electrical room that's in the building on a corner that's required for feed for code. And then there's some little supporting equipment. I'm not going to go into details for the panels of building at this stage because they're so preliminary, but yeah, it's pretty basic facility, and we try to match aesthetic and color and keep the profile as low as possible. I think they're proposing a 10-to-1 roof slope with snow guards, so we'd hold the snow and just have a drip line. Effectively try to not build a very large pitched roof that'd be visible from the trail for the community to complain about. So trying to keep those things in mind. Any questions, I guess, before I move on to some of the other project components about the boilers, the building, or what's fresh on your guys' mind here? Thoughts on that?
A question. So this boiler project is for basically our existing digesters and to heat our existing buildings. We're having a conversation about basically building a new facility. So I'm trying to, one of the things I would want to understand is how much, number one, how much this project would cost, and number two, how many of the facilities that this project would serve would potentially be decommissioned in the future if we go to an alternative treatment process. And that may be later in your presentation, I'm not sure, but.
Yeah, so I'll just say it. I can give you cost numbers now. They are preliminary. It's a class 5 estimate. I left them out of the slides, but we just got costs back in while I was drafting the presentation. Just to kind of rehash, I wrote down some notes, and just so you guys are aware. So right now, currently, when we did the budget on this project back in 2024, we had Fund 2 for CIP expenditures at $3.1 million and Fund 6 rehab replacement at $22.8 million. So $26 million was the approximate budget amount fully built out with design services. Our fee from Brown and Caldwell is $2.2 million, and our current class 5 estimate we just received with them right now is at $26 million. So we're looking at about $28 million, but that is forecasted out for expenditures for midpoint of construction, which is anticipated somewhere around summer of 2028. So we're pretty close right now. We're within that range of, I think we've got everything in budget and scope for the project. If that answers the first part of your question for kind of getting a handle on it, since I omitted those from the presentation. The second point related to serving facilities for now versus into the future, it's a bit challenging. I didn't touch on it yet at this point. So they developed their baseline heat demand load under the assumption that we're going to continue to keep our process heat demands with build out for future loadings coming into the plant. And then secondarily, with the existing facility heat loads without modifications, because at the time they started this project, we didn't have a handle on what facilities we were constructing, if any, or if we were going to continue down the road. So in the event that I'm gonna cut ahead a little bit here, but for next month, in the event that we stay the course with alternative zero, as Kroll is labeling it, with nutrient removal, which is the status quo with running the facility in its current footprint and operational status, these boilers will serve us fine. In the event that we move forward with the other alternative for nutrient removal associated with the heat demand load for the new facilities proposed, I think there were 3 buildings placed on site. There's one to house the membranes, there's one to house the fine screening facility, and then there was a new facility for the, there's like they call it mag prep system, but it's basically a side stream treatment for removal of phosphorus off of the digester. So for those, over you, if I remember seeing figures, Jason, does that seem right? 3 buildings on site? Yeah. And there might have been a chemical storage facility too, right, with blowers. So it might actually end up being 4 buildings. So it's hard to know yet without Kroll finalizing the footprint and size of those buildings, the exact heat demand that they're going to be requiring for them. Something that's still ongoing. We can ask that question based off the square footage and what portion of the space needs to be conditioned and heated, what that heat demand will be. But I would say I would find it unlikely based off the size of those buildings that we would be in a position where we would be able to provide the necessary heat demand required for those new facilities relative to the offset from the demolition of the existing facilities. But that's a great point to make. It's just ensuring we have that coordination, and I can follow up on that.
So if I understood correctly, this new boilers facility would serve the existing plant. And then if we went to a new treatment process, it would also serve any new buildings that came along with that new treatment process.
Potentially. So the caveat is, and
As compared to being abandoned or partially abandoned,
Yeah.
with the new boiler facility being built to serve those new buildings.
yeah, I mean, in an ideal world, if we can utilize our basically free energy source of biogas or digester gas as much as possible, that would be a goal. The challenge is always, and I'm going to back up a couple slides here to show you guys the map of the facility. When they add on and expanded DNR,
I apologize for interrupting. I need to take a 60-second, 2-minute break. We recess for like 6 minutes. Okay, gonna just reset.
all right, so I think that the follow-up, the secondary question that Director Wilkins asked was pertaining to the coordination with the heating for the facility being able to provide long-term heat still. I mean, the process heat demand for the digesters is a huge chunk of our heat demand required off these boilers. That's not changing anytime soon. We don't intend to move away from anaerobic digestion of sludge. So no matter what, you're going to have that baseline load on these boilers long-term for the next 25 to 30 years or longer, unless we moved away from anaerobic digestion, some other way to deal with volatile solids reduction. So with that in mind, I guess to get to your point, the reason I brought this slide up is it comes down to economics of the associated cost of makeup error for facilities that are considered like explosive environments and need certain air changes for mechanical equipment. And so what you can see, and the reason I brought it back up, is that the length or distance needed to pipe the hot water loops out to these associated facilities relative cost-wise to the offsets of paying for electricity or natural gas is what's going to drive the determination of which facilities, if we go with an expansion of the plant long-term, will get hot water or stone. So I don't have that information in front of me in that assessment at this stage of the game, but I brought it up just to kind of show you. You can see at the very far right side of the slide, that's a pump station, BNR influent pump station that we utilize to pump water back up into the PNR building. Those red and yellow squares on the bottom half of the plant are primarily facilities that were constructed in the 03, 05 expansion, and most of them were elected to be on natural gas or electricity. I can't speak because I wasn't here doing the design at the time if that was due to the output limits of the existing boilers, but my hope would be is that with this new 250 horsepower boiler and a second one, if feasible, and the upscale. We don't want to go too big on the boiler sizing that boiler can't turn down for our existing heat demand requirements. But if we have upper end capacity and we have free biogas available, you would hope you could pipe some hot water over to one of these new facilities and utilize that over paying for natural gas or electricity. I think it's your question best I can at this time. But go back forward to where I was. So I think that kind of wraps up, unless there's any other questions for now on the boilers and the building direction we're headed. I just kind of wanted to bring you guys into that fold. With that, we're going to talk about a couple other facilities that are included, and I'm not going to hit today on all of them. I have a slide at the end that kind of summarizes the facilities that are being discussed, but these are kind of the high-level large components. So why are we talking about the digester 31 floating pipe? So for those not familiar with it, this is our secondary digester. It acts as a holding digester. We don't actually perform the anaerobic digestion of the sludge in it. We get some secondary byproducts of having it, but it serves as basically a holding tank in a sense for both the sludge that's already digested as well as the digester gas that we utilize at the facility. It was constructed as well in 1976, so it's hit 48 years old. It's gone through 2 recoatings. It's a steel cover that basically moves up and down on a series of tracks, and it's got a certain amount of ballasted weight to it, and it's operated off of level. This is how we've been historically operating it. Challenges with it are that with the existing digester gas control strategy, we have to keep that cover so far down. If it goes up too high, we run the risk of breaking the sludge level in the tank, or if we draw sludge too far down and letting gas get exposed to the environment, bleeding it off. And so I'm kind of looking over at Michael because, he and I have had quite a bit of discussions about strategies with this, but flexibility long term, we don't have a lot of variability in the cover height. We really only have about 1 foot of variability in the cover, even though it's on 6-foot tracks, due to those challenges with the sludge. Is that a fair statement, Michael, about a foot?
It's a little more than that. It's a couple of things.
Is it a couple of?
It depends on what the sludge level is.
Yeah. We Brown and Caldwell laid out 3 alternatives in addition to maintaining the status quo with the cover with the digester gas strategy. We typically have somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 minutes in the current strategy to accommodate a change in pressure in the system, whether we end up flaring it or sending it to the boilers. So the 3 other alternatives to the status quo were the first option they looked at was a pressure-based control strategy where we would, instead of operating off level, operate off of pressure. Unfortunately, with the pressure-based control strategy, TTSA's digesters domes are they were constructed with very low headspace in them, so we don't have a lot of volume available to us for a pressure-based control strategy. They were talking about, I think it was less than a minute of digester gas strategy controls for variations. I think it was in the neighborhood of about 30 seconds to make a decision, which is too short of a time to install equipment for us for safety purposes, as well as pressure relief valves. So the pressure-based control strategy instead of level was not a viable option without getting too specific. The other options were, they threw out in the report that's preliminary still a ballast option with water tanks. It would be an experimental solution that's never been utilized before, and I have concerns whenever you utilize water in a mountain snow country environment, it's just setting itself up for disaster. They've never trialed it anywhere else, and with this, we don't have any redundancy with the digester gas cover, so it didn't seem like a viable alternative. So the third alternative proposed, and it's on the next slide, and I can get into it, is the membrane option. So we really kind of have 2 primary options. It's either continue to operate the digester cover as status quo or move forward with the membrane. So I think the rub is really what are we gaining by putting in the membrane and alleviating here, right? So the big discussion we've been having with nutrient removal plans and with the facility as a whole is, as I think the board's aware, the operational costs of the facility are pretty high. Some of that's attributed to needing to do 24/7 operation of the plant. And one of the long-term goals that we'd like to do is move the facility over to being not operated 24/7, so we could have day shifts and then, maybe a swing shift, and then on the weekends let the plant be idle. We can't do that in the current control strategy with the digester as a holding tank for the sludge. Dual membrane buys us that availability by having the ability to operate a larger sludge blend or sludge storage quantity by basically front loading the loading out prior to the weekend, and then we could fill up over the weekend. Whereas right now, if we try to do that, we would overload that holding digester or violate on gas. So It also provides this additional gas storage quantity volumes, so substantially. I didn't put the data numbers in here. It removes the potential for the release of biogas into the environment if you break the seal. And then the last point in here is currently the floating cover has to be cleared off for safety reasons of snow whenever it snows. And the reason being is with that level, you run the risk with PRVs in the system. If you build up too much snow, it can overpressurize or cause a hazard. You guys have questions about the sewer piece? I'll defer to Ops to talk about that. So we're trying to mitigate a number of risks and also to provide us the availability if we were to go with the generator on site, have additional gas quantity to be able to burn through a generator instead of sending to the flare to be burned off and wasted. So the one that there's a couple manufacturers out there. There's Evoqua and Westech that both make there's a number of installs all over the country. I think they put a couple down in the Bay Area. You can see them if you go over Interstate 80 on the Bay Bridge or back. You look off to the side. Which facility is that, Jason? Right off 80? Can't remember. Maybe something else.
East Bay Mud?
It might be East Bay Mud right off 80, but you can see they've got these installed there. Wind and snow potential. They basically maintain two separate membranes with a series of blowers. In our case, the blowers would be housed indoors due to the environment. And they maintain a pressure for the air inside the dome and keep it inflated while allowing the secondary membrane to variably ensure that the gas is stored in the system and fully contained, while also allowing us a larger variable sludge that we store in. So it's an interesting opportunity. Whether or not we end up going forward with it is going to be a conversation that will probably be a follow-up to this one at some point when we have more data too. Another project component being discussed, this one is the waste gas burner. That's a photo taken from maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago in the evening hours. So waste gas burner serves as our flare. It burns off digester gas that we're not currently calling for from the boilers or other system. Right now, if we have biogas and we're not calling for it at the boilers, it goes to the flare. So right now you can see that as more or less a wasted potential energy that we have on site. We don't have, going back to the conversation about the floating cover, additional gas storage space to store a lot of biogas on site. So what's crazy, and a number of staff, you see it if you ever come out here on a cold morning or evening, if the boilers don't have a current call for heat and they're not operating, you'll see it'll be 5 degrees outside of our flares running. What the heck? Why is that thing on? Well, we don't have anywhere else to store the gas, right? And it's not that we're going to buy a ton of space with the Duosphere or the dual membrane cover. We'll buy back enough time for hours of storage instead, where we could potentially burn that gas at the appropriate time instead of flaring it. Couple of pieces of information. So Barrick, it's again 1976 install. The big driver for the relocation and replacement of it is the setback code requirements from the digester. So they want to see 50 feet. Right now, we're looking at about 23 feet in current code compliance, and it's not regulated by the Air Board. So we'd be looking to get a newer flare that is code compliant, setback 50 feet, as well as fully regulated by the California Air Resources Board. So it'd be more emissions friendly versus the existing flare, better for the environment sense. The proposed waste gas burner that's identified, there's a number of these. It's Barrick again. They're kind of the staple name in the industry for waste gas burners. It's a Model 244. We put it 50 feet greater than. There's no visible flame for the public, and it's got full turn down capability to meet all the CARB requirements and great destruction efficiency for that, converting that biogas over to CO2 for the flare on. So that one's pretty straightforward. It's been identified on site. It would be close to the new boiler building on Riverside. So that is one conversation that's ongoing, is where to place it relative. But we do want to meet those code requirements for setbacks. And then this is kind of the more exciting discussion point, and it's kind of, since right now it's pretty loose still, but I don't know if the embedded link Michelle's going to work on the presentation for the board. We don't have to play it, but I included a video if you guys want to search it on your time. The company's name is Mainspring, and it's a linear generator video that explains how it works. So I'll have to kind of do a brief explanation here. So as one of the alternatives of the project, trying to target funding sources from the state that could open the project up to potentially offsetting some of the costs, as well as making better use of the digester gas, is the linear generator. So, the thing with the linear generators, this is a new technology. They have a patent on it. Napa Sanitation just put one in and has been running it for about 6 months. You might have heard internal combustion engines or microturbines or other alternatives for biogas. Historically, we've looked at it, and our gas production levels relative to the cost don't have the big upside for us for return on investment for a 20-year life cycle on the equipment. This has that potential to break even, and the reason being is if we can in any way find a solution to the high strength waste for the community, we could offset the cost of the equipment substantially. And our current gas production levels with our seasonal variations, we would need to supplement with natural gas to the piece of equipment. So I'll kind of elaborate on that. The linear generator is extremely efficient. It's about 46% efficient with minimal derates at our altitude. The rub is that our biogas production, as I've shown you guys previously on the presentation I gave, we're a bit limited in winter where we don't produce enough biogas to fully heat the facility, let alone provide it to a unit like this. So if we were to operate this unit, they offer either PPAs, power purchase agreements, or we could just purchase the equipment on a capital level. You can run this in a blend of biogas and natural gas, or strictly on natural gas for payback for financials if we needed to. But the trade-off is that in the summer months, we're flaring gas that otherwise goes to no beneficial reuse. So there's a trade-off there on financials of, do we put the unit in if we keep maintaining the existing status quo for biogas production, if we can't uptick it from receiving high strength waste, the unit still could have payback if we're willing to burn natural gas through the unit purchasing through Southwest Gas. Now, if we decide, you know what, we're not comfortable running the unit off of natural gas for environmental reasons, then that would be a subtle cost that we would see over time unless we could find alternative sources to uptick the biogas production with digesters by taking high strength waste. So that's kind of the rub with this unit is you need to do that in order to make it pencil out.
On the analysis of the more conventional internal combustion engine generator set, isn't one of the advantages of using that is that you could use all the gas there and then you've got a radiator, so it's in effect generating electricity and acting as the boiler in terms of generating the hot water that you process water that you would use, or is there something, is it not efficient enough at generating heat? It's really made to generate electricity and you wouldn't get nearly enough heat out of the kind of radiator component of that.
It's a combination of both, and also the sizing of the equipment relative to our output of digester gas would be challenging because the turn down a lot of times on those relative to sizing for the heat recovery when working our application. So we have a pretty large swing, and they can't turn this device can turn down to about 10% output off of production just because it's just all it is oscillating pistons that are running magnets versus with an internal combustion engine, the turn down won't provide us the necessary ratio to get down to our lowest heat demand scenario. So that, along coupled with the heat recovery aspect, isn't efficient enough to hit home point to give us the heat demand requirements on the peak end that we would need to see relative to our gas we could be to it. So yeah, that's the problem more or less with that piece of it. And then, and that also plays into the microturbine discussion as well with that heat recovery. So yeah, Brown and Caldwell said in our application with our gas output, we're doing, I want to say it's on average 70 CFM for digester gas, and we need to see a substantial uptake for us to be able to size a unit like that for our heat demand requirements. But
Yeah, I'm just curious. I mean, the facilities that are large enough to and do have cogen, and do they also have boilers,
they do.
or do they just run all the gas to the cogen system and that generates the heat for the plant heating and the digester heating?
It depends on their operating scenarios. From what I've seen, some of them will have both, and then if they can achieve by default with the cogen unit, they will, and then use the boiler as a secondary. The new Rose facility didn't even have their boiler in operation when we were there, but I'm going to turn to Richard. What did Riverside do with your guys' system? Because you had both, correct? If I remember right.
Boilers, and we had fuel cell.
Yeah, fuel cell.
Yeah, and we had the West Tech dual sphere membrane.
Fuel cell, that doesn't generate a waste heat though, does it?
It does generate a waste heat, and the newest unit they installed generates hydrogen as well.
On the scale though, right? It's kind of
Yes.
our rub with it. We just size-wise, we can't. To put it in perspective, this unit, I put it up there, is 250 kilowatts. in the scheme of the plant's overall demand, if you want to know a little on the financial side here, it's okay to talk about this, right? It's all public information. So our utility bills for electricity with Truckee Donner PUD average between, for electricity specifically, 60 to 80 grand is what I've been seeing. They can take higher a month.
Right?
Yeah.
Closer
It's
to
been higher lately. My bills are, it's been closer to 100,000 a month. What I've been seeing for usage for the facility is like 660,000 kilowatt hours a month used. If you ran this thing flat out 24/7, the most it's going to output for us, and this thing is arguably oversized seasonally for biogas production. In the summer, we might be able to run it flat out in the winter. At most, it would offset about 25 to 35% of our overall electricity demand, which is still a win, I think, if we can lower our bills. And that is factored into the financials as what that offset's going to be for electricity when we get the final proposal from Mainspring and evaluate it further with our consultant. This is meant just to be kind of an introduction to the technology for you guys, not a decision-making point in the juncture. But it's by no means going to generate enough electricity to offset our entire demand for the facility. It's just not going to happen. And they don't design other sizes of units for this technology at this stage of it, but it kind of takes the pros and cons of microturbines or fuel cells and engines and tries to marry them to give you the best of both worlds. And that's why I think you're going to see more and more facilities start to online these as another alternative to running an internal combustion engine or a microturbine or a fuel cell. And there's already a second facility. They've got a bunch of natural gas installs already, but Napa Sand's got one already online that they're running and they're working through. And then Silicon Valley Clean Water Districts also. So we'd be an early adopter of the technology if we were to do it. And that's why it also opens itself up to additional funding sources, which is a big driver for the project. So if we can find other avenues to offset costs, eventually. So
with if we were to install a device like this, we would, when we've got excess digester gas, we would run this off of the digester gas, and then we would have a decision to make during times when we don't have excess digester gas as to whether to run this or let it sit idle. It sounds like running it off natural gas, the cost of the natural gas is less than the cost of the electricity it was produced.
yeah, that's correct. So it'd be more of an environmental choice on whether or not on a policy basis we want to operate it to recover costs. In the scenarios we do long-term take high-strength waste receiving, it will pay back and break even depending on the amount of high-strength waste we take. And that's, I think just to recall and remind you guys, we did approve a high-strength waste study with Brown and Caldwell that's ongoing in parallel with this. We haven't received the first deliverable yet. That will talk to the feasibility associated with that. I know the town, Tahoe Truckee, Sierra Disposal, and Placer County have all expressed interest in redirecting their food waste over to the facility. And then we want to have ongoing discussions about fog. So it really is kind of a first step if we put one of these in or wait and stuff out to tell the public, like, look, we want to start making better use for biogas rather than just flaring it in the summer endlessly for no beneficial reuse. So there's trade-offs, right? And that's really kind of it's not a position for me to stand on and say, I can give a recommendation and so can staff and so can management, but ultimately it's going to be a policy decision on whether or not we're comfortable with that, as far as burning natural gas through it and it costs. So in our current gas production state. So there's that piece. We'll move on then. So again, I have another video if you guys, I can send you a link or you can look it up, but organic Rankine cycle, this was the one that was what more or less got us to give Brown and Caldwell more attention during the proposal phase, thinking outside the box. It's kind of fallen behind the linear generator as far as a preferred alternative technology. And the reason being is the upsides are pretty heavily outweighed by the downsides on it for recovery of that heat. So just a background, linear generator, when I was on it, I didn't really talk about how it operates, but it feeds a blend of biogas or natural gas, and those pistons oscillate and they compress, and then they do a low temperature ignition. So it's very low NOx levels. It's really easy to permit with CARB. And there's no detonation or explosion from a standard, like what you think with an engine. There's no oils to lubricate it. So I forgot to talk about that on the last piece. Organic Rankine cycle is a bit different. So instead of burning biogas, you'd be still sending your biogas or digester gas over to your boiler and burning it through your boiler and outputting more hot water than you'd otherwise need. This serves as basically a heat pump that takes that low-grade waste heat hot water and then reconverts it to energy. The drawback is it's not super efficient. We're talking 10 to 15% efficient. So if you're burning biogas and running it through the boiler versus linear generator and then recovering low-grade waste heat and hot water, you're going to get better efficiencies out of the linear generator. It's going to pay back better in the upside potential if we were to increase biogas production in the future, substantially higher, not just marginally. The overall cost of the equipment is lower, but it has a lot more moving parts as far as those heat pumps go, and there's a regular recurring maintenance interval that's pretty costly for the year. So it's something that can still be in the project scope as a potential, but if we were going to go with one or the other, at this stage of the game, the linear generator would be my recommendation. If we had, we'd probably just recommend one technology, not both, if we can secure funding, and that's going to be discussion. But yeah, that's more or less how these work. It's still on the table, but it's kind of taking backseat to if we're going to consider doing something with the biogas other than flaring it. It would make more sense to put it through a generator than put it through a heat pump in a sense and try to recover some of that electricity. So, and then the final discussion point, I don't know if we've talked about this before. I included a slide from North Star Community Services District. This is their biogas boiler project that they've been working on for a while. We went and had a discussion earlier on in the project with North Star. We met with them on site to discuss where they're going with it. So you heard Truckee Donner PUD today talk about biomass facilities. It was thrown out on a preliminary level with Brown and Caldwell, and they looked at it a little bit, but not extensively. But there's a whole bunch of hoops that need to jump through, and for the sake of the project timeline and scope, we need to replace these existing biogas boilers. And we had discussions with Placer County and Truckee Sierra Disposal about the fuel source availability. They won't commit to any contractual terms with TTSA as we're not providing them any woody fuel to be mulched. And if we were to buy it, preliminary numbers they gave us was $10 per bone dry ton. So we'd be paying for fuel instead of using a free fuel source with biogas. Long term, it still could be a strategy in the region if partners want to move forward, but we just don't at this stage have a lot of tangible, I'm pretty much here, but pressure to do this as far as it goes. But for those not familiar with it, feel free to look into it. I'll discuss it briefly. You basically take wood mulch and you hold it in a bin, and then you burn it through a boiler similar to nuclear fuel, right? And then you create heat from that. And California's got some pretty strict regulations now on what you need to do to scrub that coming off of it. There's different grades of fuels you can talk about too in buying. We also had discussions with Plumas County, who has a facility they're operating up there for the hospital group, and they also have an organic Rankine cycle piece of equipment. However, they've had challenges with securing fuel regularly on their end, which is crazy considering the forest and there's endless fuel supply. But until there's a provider willing to step up and provide access to that fuel, it's just not a very viable option for us at this stage of the game with our timelines and what we're looking back. So I kind of talked about that in the slide. You guys can feel free to take a closer look. But yeah, we were going to consider having a tour at one point in Plumas County Health, but that was also to see the organic Rankine cycle unit. They haven't been operating as organic Rankine cycle unit because the fuel costs have an incentive to pay back to keep the unit in service. So it sat idle for 3 years, is what I was told. So because of that, we kind of lean away from organic Rankine cycle. If the payback's not there to run the boilers off of the fuel to then run it through the system because of maintenance cost and upkeep, similar to biomass boilers, until we can secure a readily available fuel source or have partners in the greater region that are willing to partner to do biomass. It's really not something tangible for our project at this time. Some of the other project elements that I didn't discuss today, just for the sake of time, is, Blake, you hit on it a little bit with the hot water equipment. We're talking about pumps, piping, heat exchangers, et cetera. 2 of the digesters are running mesophilic operation right now with heat exchangers not sized appropriately for thermo, so those need to be upgraded and the associated pumping pipes. The stat gas CO2 equipment, right now we take stat gas off of the boilers and we basically run it through a wet scrubber that takes out impurities, and then we compress it and send it over to our recarb system. We've been playing around with whether or not we need to utilize that for pH adjustment prior to feeding our existing BNR facility. So there's ongoing discussions. If we end up selecting an alternative where we don't need to long-term do wastewater treatment the way we currently are and go with nutrient removal, do we need a stat gas system? The consultant's been tasked with sizing and designing that, but it might be pulled out of the project element for construction if we don't need it to save cost, because we're not going to build something we're only going to use for 2 years just to have mothballed if we can make do without it. So Ops has been trying to run the facility without stat gas or CO2 adjustment for pH, which I think give them applause for piloting and trying that out right now. Natural gas equipment, yeah, so we have, I didn't talk about it, but we have a natural gas meter over on, we have two of them on the facility. One of the two might need to be upsized for the project based off boiler placement. And then we're going to need to run piping. Because right now behind the boardroom over the stub out ends right here at Donut Lunchroom. So that will need to be continued on for the new boiler building if we stay the course with that location. Digester gas equipment, we didn't talk about placement, scrubbing equipment. So we have an H2S scrubber, it's called an iron sponge that we use on top of the building. It's extremely costly to basically service the thing regularly for media change outs because it's confined space entry, so there's safety aspects with staff being trained for that. So we'd like to get the equipment located on the ground adjacent to the gas main for the new building. So it'll be a vessel that's more manageably replaced. And instead of using impregnated bark, we're going to go with the engineered media that tends to perform better in far fewer change outs. Updating the digesters to have dual PRVs on the top right now. Two of the digesters, I believe, only have single pressure relief valves, and code requires two, so that's an upgrade to the code. Sludge recirculation and transfer equipment for the mixing systems to achieve thermophilic operation are on the table. We didn't even get into E&I and SCADA with those pieces. HVAC upgrades to the digester building because of the setback code requirements for the heaters for the building. NFPA upgrades with the electrical equipment ties in, site civil funding, permitting. I'm not going to discuss at this stage of the game. So with that, where are we at and where we're going? Today we're still in the process of finalizing the basis of design report. The next steps are once that report's finalized, the plan is to move into 30% design in the coming months. So you'll see at the end of February here, we've gotten a draft version of it. We'll provide comments to the consultant has to speak. That's why I'm presenting to you. And then come June, we're looking at getting our first deliverable on the final design with the project elements. And ongoing in that phase is those other pieces associated with permitting. We already did geotechnical investigation this past summer. Site survey has been performed. And then we also have notifications to the tribes, et cetera, for the project site. So, yeah, other than that, any other questions about my mind?
Thanks, Scott. That was very informative. A lot of elements to something that doesn't sound at first blush all that complicated. I'm just curious, if you go back one slide,
Yeah.
the timeline there. So it looks like final design, 100% plans this time next year. Bidding process, we're going to just do a design bid build. So then bidding begins after the 100% plans. And then you mentioned something about $26 million current, something class 5 cost estimate. So there's a lot of wiggle room in there, but you're guesstimating. And then there was a $2.2 million other item. Was that construction management?
That was design fee.
That's the design fee, which we're already
Ongoingly paying for right now.
okay.
Yeah.
And then what is the timeline for if, let's say, it's bid in March of next year, awarded in April, May, June? What is you said something about 2028
Is the midpoint? Yeah. Well, so
midpoint?
yeah. Well, actually, let's walk that back a bit. Ideally, we're breaking ground next summer at some point, right? Relative, depending on the contractor's ability to get submittals to us in a timely fashion and get approved. I assume they're going to want to start their site civil work and yard piping utility work as soon as possible, taking advantage of the summer, and maybe get the foundation, if not more, of the building complete, so they can work through that first winter inside the building. They're anticipating approximately 2 years of construction at this time of the project. So I think midpoint would be, what would that be? Summer 2027 is what I stated, which was more or less, they said 18 months out from now is when they were saying midpoint. I think that's a bit aggressive, but for the baseline for that class 5 cost estimate that we were provided by Brown Caldwell.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we want to take advantage of as much time as possible. The proposal talked about 3 winters or something like that before we, and that was including the end of last winter. So we're trying to expedite the project just due to concerns with exposure for the existing boilers failing between now and then. And that's the driver. We've already had a couple of failures, and I don't know, I feel like we're kind of covered right now, but I'm looking at Paul, like those boilers still are well past due for replacement. They're at risk at any point of flame out.
Yeah, they're pretty old.
Yeah. So
Well, great presentation. Sounds like Brown Caldwell, you're happy with the work they're doing. And I know you got Greg here and Brandon, all staff is kind of got their hands in this stuff. I know big changes like this, involve not just engineering, but ops and maintenance and, all that. So, happy to see hopefully the whole team pitching in on this and coming up with a solution, that works
Yeah,
across the board.
it's tough, right? Because you're trying to please everybody, and like this whole design by committee thing scares some people, but at the same time too, like ops is going to be right. So there's been general consensus that I don't think on any of these alternatives that we have chosen the wrong direction. Ops actually was one of the larger drivers for alternative 4 by the Riverside location, displacement location. They were involved in that whole discussion. So we've been trying to include everybody in respective of time and their other job duties and functions here during design, right? Keeping everybody informed in the loop as we go along. So we're not designing in a box per se and end up with a solution that's not accepted by staff. So yeah, trying to do our best.
Thanks. And Dan?
What is so with our existing boilers, we've got 3 of them. So what is, like, if one of them fails, what does that mean to our treatment processes and to our building heating?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit and I'll look over to ops and maintenance in a sec. So we did a Hearst boiler tie-in. Now we don't talk about the hot water boiler. The program has been problematic on it as far as I understand it. So that boiler was put in the O3 expansion in a separate room. Again, doesn't meet any of the code requirements and has not been operated pretty much for the last 15 years. Is that fair? 10, 15 regularly? So that,
The last 10 regular.
yeah. So the thought was in an emergency, if we don't operate typically all 3 boilers and their output as it goes. I think 2 are normally running, guys. That more in the winter, more
You
common.
can have 3 at times, but that's more irregular.
So they're cycling.
On and off. It's hard on the boilers, and you normally don't want to cycle, right? You want to keep a consistent output as much as possible. If we had a problem right now, and the exposure we have is, if we lost one of the 2 boilers, we'd either have to decide to try to utilize that interconnection we performed with the Hearst boiler in the interim, which is over a 20-year boiler now itself, or bring a rental skid boiler on site and try to tie in at some point to the existing header in the event of emergency. So we had a major failure, 2 years ago now, 1.5 years, 2 years ago, going into a winter, where one of the boilers, the box was rusted out there, firebox boilers, and we needed emergency repairs on it. But getting the crews out and the timing of everything, we were scrambling to find solutions to this very conversation we're having.
So I mean, a worst case scenario is that if digesters if they get below, whatever the temperatures they need to be operating at, then our treatment process can fail.
Yeah, and the rule of thumb I've heard is a degree a day per digester if you're not providing heat to it. That's kind of the general industry idea. So, there's a specific window of temperatures to achieve for the EPA time and temperature needed to produce our Class B biosolids. So we run the risk of not doing proper volatile solids reductions, but things like pathogen reduction, et cetera. So in that event, I really don't know what ops would do if in the scenario we couldn't get any heat extended. We'd have to bring emergency boiler because it's not an option to let those digesters get upset if they don't meet compliance. That would be unacceptable. So in some scenario, we're going to get heat to them. It's just a matter of how, right? Yeah. So that's really where we would go with it. It's you only get such a window of range to meet those requirements. You have to continue those kind of settings. So
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Scott. If there's other questions, there's no action being asked here, so it's just informational. If other board members have questions, I encourage them to talk to staff about it. We've still got some more stuff here, and I know one of the board members has a noon hard stop and like to get through the staff reports, and
I just moved it.
you did.
Yeah.
All right.
They will move it, so we're
If
good.
you got questions,
fire away.
now's a good time to ask. That's all right.
Director Clement, you got one for me?
No, I had looked at those boilers a couple weeks ago. They're pretty ancient.
That room is.
Yeah.
It's pretty evident the project needs to occur. It's really
Yeah.
just a matter of finding the most economic solution for us.
Hopefully the new one will last as long as the old one. You can only hope. No, that's the latest problem nowadays.
Is Director Fox still on the call?
He's actually on Teams now.
Dale or Scott, any questions for?
I'm good. Thank you for asking.
I'm good. I'm good, Blake.
Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. Feel like I have a much better idea of this close to $30 million project that we're doing, so it's nice to know. Okay, we will move on at this point to staff reports. And Mike.
Morning, Board of Directors, Michael Peak, Operations Department Manager. For the month of January, all plant waste discharge requirements were met for the month. The plant performed well through the month. You can see that we started a VNR bead removal project that we've been wanting to start for a while now. We got some equipment to help us facilitate that. We're trying to remove large amounts of cubic feet of the polystyrofoam beads that are associated to the cells of the D-night cells of the VNR facility that get into the backwash tank. We're trying to get those out of there. And we had 0 completed work orders and 3 pending. Audit for the operations department. We also participated. Still no, I'll wait. Any questions for the operations department?
Yeah, Mike, when we do the bead removal on those columns, obviously they're out of service. How long does it take to do a bead removal?
We're actually pulling these beads out of the backwash tank, so we don't have to take any of the cells out of service to do that. These are beads that have left those cells and are now in the backwash tank that we have to get rid of, so that they don't end up in the rest of the plant.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Go ahead, Paul.
Good morning, Mark.
Thank you.
Or good, almost there, sorry. So for the month of January, we provided support for the digestion improvements project, nutrient removal project, SCADA server replacement project is ongoing. We're nearing the end of the 811 CMMS integration. We've had a couple of hiccups on that, but that is progressing well. We're also continuing on with Civic Clerk software implementation project and the network upgrade project. A few of the notable items or activities throughout the month: we upgraded Rapid Mix pH controller to the latest Hawk SC4500s. We're replacing quite a few of those throughout the plant, getting us off the old technology. We replaced and commissioned a stripper underflow, or 2 stripper underflow flow meters, and installed a weather camera, which is open to the public as well, so we can monitor snow and things like that to kind of assist with our snow removal operations. Completed fabrication and installation of a grit classifier inlet box, which you'll see in pictures later. We also completed the warranty replacement of a Huber wash press #1, and repaired some concrete and installed a camera at the Headworks building. And we're continuing research for a redundant ISP and replaced the filter press shifter chain. Work orders for the month, completed total were 205 amongst all departments. Pending is 268. That's both corrective and preventative maintenance combined. We've gotten down to a much more manageable list, and we've cleared out a lot of the backlog compared to previous months. Moving on to photos. You can see that's the warranty wash press replacement right there from Huber. They sent us out all new components for that as a warranty replacement. They did a great job for us.
The wash press is part of the Headworks facility.
That's correct.
Yeah, it's taking the stuff off the bar screens.
Correct. Yeah. Let's see, moving on to the next pictures there. There's one of our fabricators, in-house fabricators, building up the grid classifier inflow box. And then to the right, those are the stripper underflow meters that we installed. Something new for operations, something they've been asking for quite some time. So that's all I have.
Questions for Paul? Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Jason?
Good. Board, so we won't discuss any more digestion improvements. I think we got a pretty good summary on that one. TRI Alpine, the relining project where we've received 75% submittal. We're reviewing it at this point. We're doing a heavy round of tribal outreach. We identified 3 or 4 different tribal entities that might be interested in following the project. There's still a ton of stakeholder outreach, Caltrans, TCPUD. Everyone kind of wants to make sure we stay informed. And then we're still continuing the outreach to the community that recreationally uses the bike trails. So we're still in contact with the tubing companies and the bike rental companies. So so far so good. Haven't run into any snags that make us think it's not doable. Still on track for day after Labor Day starting the process. Nutrient removal alternatives study. So we are currently reviewing draft report amongst staff. And we will be doing the workshop on the 25th, which I know several board members are planning on attending. Very much appreciated by staff. It's going to be an extremely intense day. Plan on camping out and talking a lot of numbers. It's a very extensive report. So kind of our opportunity to cross any T's, dot the I's that might come up.
Jason, on the digester improvement project and the TRI, these 2 projects that are getting closer to actually kicking off. I know Scott mentioned design costs and construction costs, but there's the construction management, kind of keeping an eye on the contractor. Do you envision, is that part of the design services for the engineers to do the construction management, or is that, how much of that's going to be in-house?
We've asked to include CM in any of the cost estimating for the proposals. TRI, I think it is included already. The digestion improvements, I believe CM work is part of the class 5 estimate that he was sharing with you today. So we're not planning on doing exclusively in-house CM, but there will be in-house CM.
Okay.
So there's going to be, especially like with the TRI project, there's going to be tons of off-hour type stuff. So we're going to cover where we can, but we're very likely to supplement our own CM work with the outside firm. So they're pretty exciting projects. On the data transport study, we had our second data assimilation meeting, so we had a really good discussion with Jacobs about where they feel the SAT is, where its potential future endpoint might be. So far, they're very optimistic. They're basing all of their assumptions on data that we've already gathered over the last 30, 40 years. All signs point to the phosphorus absorption of capability of the field being, 100 plus years remaining, and technically no limitation on nitrogen removal because it's a biological process. So what we are doing now is we're finalizing that report. Staff will have an opportunity to review it, and then we'll set up a meeting with Quantum and see if this suffices for their needs. And if it does, then score, then they have what they have, and they can start their process on their end. No timelines on that. It's also possible they can come back and say it's insufficient, and that we would need to be doing more in-house or on hands-on testing. At this point, this was considered phase 1. I believe we budgeted $500,000. This phase cost $100,000. So it would be kind of score if we could not have to do phase 2, but we are prepared in the event that we do. So that conversation should be happening probably spring, summer time frame when we're ready to start having that.
It sounds like the preliminary results are that the disposal field should be functional for the indefinite future.
Yeah, there's the groundwater levels have stayed the same, which indicates the permeability of the field is still great. The phosphorus, there's like effectively a plume of chemically fixed phosphorus in the field that has only reached, like 300 yards, 400 yards from the disposal field. We've got a mile to our terminus. So, based on just extrapolating that linear relationship, we're talking decades and decades of assembling the capacity for phosphorus. And like I said, the nitrogen is a biological process. So we're not seeing anything that would concern us. And there was also an interesting the 303D listing, the impaired water body. They removed the intent to go with a 303D listing on the Truckee River for nitrate. Apparently, Michael and Ops had made several comments to them when they proposed it initially that we thought there was concerns with their testing methodology, their sampling methodology. Turns out he's right, and they decided on their own now that the methodology was flawed and it should not be on the 303D list. So we've shared that information with Corolo doing the nutrient removal alternatives, and they're glad, but they don't believe that it would make an impact on worst case scenario limitations if we were to see those in the future. It would just, unfortunately, might impact funding, which is not great. But Martis is still listed for phosphorus. And the big one was TDS is now proposed to be listed on the 303D, which is very constraining. So we're keeping an eye on all those things. Yeah, that could be problematic in the 10 to 15 year time frame.
End result of this freight transport study is one. It was the preliminary request from Mohan when we said we wanted to have our permit reviewed. But right now things are looking positive that nothing's jumping out of the freight transport study, at least, that's raising red flags that a permit's going to get, the freight transport study is going to result in a further restrictions on the permit and effluent requirements met.
Yeah, it's a very complex formula that they use to determine your impact on surrounding water bodies, and because there has been an impact on both Truckee and Martis, not conclusively directly related to us, but obviously partially, there is still potential that limitations could change based on the data that they've gotten from us primarily on the river. So that still remains to be seen. So in the laboratory, they just finished up the method update. So periodically the EPA refreshes the methods that you're allowed to use for wastewater testing in compliance with 40 CFR. There were several methods that had to be modified and updated. So they took care of that. On-site assessment, every other year on-site assessment they have to do for certification scheduled for April. Quarterly testing for industrial waste is underway right now. It's actually completed now. There was no corrective actions this month, and public outreach operations hosted Tahoe Expeditionary Academy. Kind of threw that together at the last minute, and they did an excellent job. Greg and Michael gave an excellent tour, and always gave great reviews on that. Some photos included with that. All right. Any questions?
Thanks, Jason. Any questions for Active Services? One to Finance and Admin?
In Liz's absence, I'll do the finance and admin. So Liz worked with Mike Smith, our safety officer, to create a safety calendars for 2025. They've completed the normal AP, payroll, general ledger processes, and bank reconciliations. Finance committee, as far as billing and customer service, billing went out, the biannual billing went out. They've completed one commercial property inspection. Connection fees paid to date, 242. Commercial 1, 9 residential to paid. Purchasing normal duties were carried out throughout the month, as well as administrative duties.
Question on the biannual billing. So the majority of our customers just get charged on the tax roll.
Correct.
How many folks do we still send direct bills to?
Do you know that number, Michelle?
I mean, you guys got to send out envelopes for each and every one of those, right?
Right.
So we're talking a couple hundred, close to 1,000, couple thousand.
I would not want to guess on that.
Okay,
It's definitely not a couple hundred,
more than that.
more than that.
Okay,
Primarily the commercial accounts, correct?
Commercial accounts and I believe timeshares.
Some timeshares, government accounts.
yeah, doing the tax roll.
Right. And new customers that have finalized since we billed in July and now they're final, so then they would get a direct bill in January.
Great, thanks.
And there's a total of 1-to-1 inspection I did. And then as far as highlights for myself, again, a lot of the stuff that I'm involved in has been covered already. We did have Director Clement come for his onboarding, gave him an extensive tour of the facility. It was a pleasure to walk around and be able to answer questions, bringing him up to speed. Continuous staff leadership training. We did do a management group strategic planning session. We're scheduled to do our kind of second phase of that here next Friday. Continue to work on the class and comp study. Mentioned the airport exchange. So Director Tristan will have to get with you for signatures at the title company to do the transfer to the land. But we're finally bringing that to the finish line. As mentioned, we had a tour for safety meetings, pretty much all the routine stuff we do for the month. Upcoming items of interest, secondary nutrient removal workshop, that's going to be a big one. And then in March, Earl will be doing the presentation to the board. So the March meeting could be a lengthy meeting with all the topics that we have on there. Budget kickoff begins, as Michelle mentioned, and then we have some training coming up, conference stuff at the annual CWEA, and we continue to send staff to various training and conferences to expand their knowledge. I know Rochelle reached out on the fire update, and that's all about the restitution for the individual who started the fire to recoup our money. They did not get back to us yet. She had a court date, so just kind of keep it on there to see if we ever get any money back from that.
Just, so on the 25th, sounds like almost the whole board's going to be at this nutrient alternatives. Could you give us kind of what is the intended outcome of this? I attended earlier camp sessions where we really were looking at a range of alternatives, but we're still calling this an alternatives analysis. What is the objective that, you know, Carollo and staff are looking for at the end of that all-day event?
Well, I'll let Jason's been working with Ricky, so I'll let him, he can probably speak to better detail than me, but I do know it's the evaluation of status quo to the master plan rehabilitation versus the other. So they've got price breakdowns. Jump in, Jason, if you have more detail.
I think the intent for that meeting is basically to finalize any understandings that might be different from the draft they've already given us. So it's basically a rehashing of the assumptions made to make sure that we're making safe assumptions. The financial assumptions are going to be a big part of that conversation.
And so it's still an alternatives analysis. And so you hopefully at the end of that, everybody agrees that you've got effectively apples and apples comparison. So that's the end of this month. Is March, is there an action coming to the board in March?
Yeah.
Here are the two alternatives, which we're at the fork in the roads. Now it's time to make the decision.
Yeah,
Are we going with the membrane or the rehab?
I'm planning on having Ricky present the report. And I'm going to ask the board to accept the report, not necessarily accepting one or the other alternative. Then we will have a probably lengthier conversation with staff recommendation.
Okay. Basically, the workshop is helping develop making sure all the assumptions that are going to go in the report, everybody's on board with a good, as best we can, comparison of the two alternatives. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any other questions for Richard? Go on to, thanks, Richard. Board of Director comments. I'll just say welcome to the board. Anything from Belize? Scott?
Oh, I'm good. Thank you. The hearing on this one has not been good.
Hey, anything from Florida?
Yeah, I got one comment. Dan, I'd like to sit back and have another committee meeting on our surplus land before our next board meeting at your convenience. Richard, is that possible with Josh and
Yeah, we'll work on getting with Director Wilson and Josh to set up a calendar date for everybody that works.
yeah, you put it together. I'll be available. I'll just need a little notice. I think it would be appropriate for the committee to get together one more time before the March board meeting, and I will be in attendance at the March meeting. Will we have an agenda item with Truckee Downer PUD again, or is today's presentation what we have to work with?
Truckee Donner PD doesn't intend to come back to the next month's board meeting. I think based on Director Christen's comment that the meeting with the ad hoc and Josh may develop the agenda item for March.
Okay.
And when will you be back in town, Dale?
I'm going to be back for the March board meeting. So, but I won't be back for the committee meeting before that board meeting.
Okay, so you need to be remote. Okay.
I'll be remote for our committee meeting. We'll be attending our March board meeting in person.
Got it. Thank you.
Great. Dan? Any comments? I think everybody knows I'm on a timeline to retire. TSD has found my replacement, Sana Schlosser. She starts Monday, March 3rd, so it's less than 2 weeks from now. We've been kind of working with her on her onboarding process, and part of that is meeting the other agencies, including TTSA. So give you a heads up on that. I retire May 1, going on vacation for a lot of May. I won't be here for the May board meeting, so just a little advance notice on that. I won't be here for May.
Congratulations.
Thanks,
I'm
Scott.
glad it's moving forward quickly.
But your expectation is that TSC will.
I hate to see it go, but
Your
we
appointment on this
don't
board.
have anybody to fight with.
So, yeah, again, I've shared, I think, with you guys, maybe just on one-offs, but, you know, my appointment was through September of 2026. My intention is to stay on, you know, as board president, at least through September of 25, depending on, you know, how retirement takes my time, and the potential interest of, we've got new board members at TSD. There may be somewhere around that time frame when I step down from the board president role, a transition to somebody else. You know, you guys have obviously a lot of stuff going on. I've got continuity here, and so I want to make that transition as smooth as possible. But so I can tell you that I intend to stay on at least through September 25, and possibly all the way through the end of my term. But it sort of depends on, you know, some unknowns as I kind of embark on the next stage of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so that's it for me. You know, you guys are working hard. Thanks for keeping the plant running well and keeping the river clean. And I think we got a closed session to go into, so let's go ahead and do that.